The pen scratched once and stopped. Malcolm set it down. The papers were thick, 7 copies. He didn't read the last one before he signed it. No one in the room spoke for a moment. Across the table, the buyer smiled. He had white teeth and good shoes and a smell like spice and something else. Money, maybe. "Well," the buyer said, "that's that." Malcolm didn't answer. He looked at the pen. "You're really just stepping out?" the man asked, still smiling. "Not retiring to Dubai or playing at golf in St. Andrews?" Malcolm shook his head. "No." "Huh." The buyer looked down at the stack. "Well, all yours, Graham." He gestured to the lawyer in the corner, who nodded and began putting the folders into a leather bag. The buyer stood. "Pleasure, really. You built something solid. Doesn't happen often." Malcolm stood too. His chair scraped the floor. The man offered his hand. Malcolm looked at it a moment, then took it. Firm. One shake. The younger man clapped his shoulder and left, still talking into a phone before the door had closed behind him. The office was quiet. The rain ticked on the window. "You're done, then," said the lawyer, not looking up. "I am. There's coffee in the break room. I've got some." The lawyer nodded once, then gathered his things and left. Malcolm was alone. He stood for a moment in the center of the conference room. One wall was all glass, looking out over the river and the roofs beyond. Rain silvered everything. He put on his coat. It was an old coat, wool, coarse, thick at the collar. Not the kind men wore to meetings anymore. The elevator down was slow. When it opened on the ground floor, the receptionist didn't look up. She was eating something from a plastic tub, the smell of vinegar and cabbage in the air. Malcolm stepped into the rain without opening his umbrella. He walked to the car, unlocked it, and got in. The Volvo started on the second try. He adjusted the rear view. He looked at himself. Then he put it in gear and drove. Malcolm parked behind the building, where the loading dock used to be before they remodeled. The asphalt there was cracked. Grass grew in seams that no one had sealed. He climbed the back stairs. The metal rail was slick with rain. Inside, the halls smelled like glue and cardboard. A woman with a clipboard walked past him without slowing. Someone had taken the company logo off the wall. There was just a faint square now, lighter than the rest. Upstairs, the office looked smaller than it had the day he started it. Empty chairs, boxes stacked in corners, each marked with bold red tape. A vacuum hummed from one of the side rooms. At his old desk sat a boy, maybe 25, maybe younger, scrolling on a phone. The boy didn't look up. Malcolm moved past him. The glass door to his former office stood open. The nameplate was gone. The residue of it was still there, adhesive stripped unevenly in a square the size of a postcard. Inside, the desk was clear. A single dead plant sat on the windowsill. No one had thrown it away. He stepped in. The carpet gave under his boots. He looked out the window. Same river, same clouds. He could remember the way the light used to hit the floor at 4 p.m. in summer. He could remember the hum of the air system before they updated it. There was nothing to take. He turned to leave and nearly bumped into a woman carrying a plastic bag. It was Sheila from accounting. Her glasses fogged in the warm air. "Oh," she said, "you're still here." "Just leaving." "Well," she held up the bag. "They passed this around last week. I wasn't sure if I'd see you." He looked inside. A greeting card, a few signatures. One line said, "Don't be a stranger," in large cursive. "Thank you," he said. She smiled like people do when they're about to say something kind but don't quite find the words. "Take care, Malcolm," he nodded. "You too." She turned and walked off quickly, her heels soft on the carpet. He left the card on the desk and walked out. The Volvo pulled onto the motorway with a slow, deliberate growl. The wipers knocked back and forth, leaving streaks. Glasgow fell behind in grays and orange lights. Malcolm didn't play the radio. The engine ticked differently in the cold. He listened to it for a while, a low, dependable rhythm, a sort of metal breathing. Beside him on the passenger seat was the map. It had been folded too many times. The creases were soft now, almost worn through in the corners. He had marked Campbeltown in pencil. Not that he needed it, but something about it felt right, deliberate. On top of the map was a small photograph, black and white. 2 men and a boy standing outside a stone house. The boy was him. One of the men was Gregor, his grandfather. The other, Malcolm's father, already looking tired even then. All 3 of them wore coats and boots. Gregor was holding a glass, his face squinting against the sun. Malcolm looked at it for a moment, then turned it over. The back was blank. He reached into the side pouch of his coat and pulled out the thermos, unscrewed the cap, poured a shot of coffee into the metal lid. It was lukewarm, bitter, still strong. He drank it slowly. Under the map was something small, a wooden chip, dark from age. It had once been part of a barrel bung carved with Gregor's initials. M.G.S. Malcolm had found it in a drawer years ago. It had always been in his desk. He hadn't planned to take it. But when he cleared out the drawers that morning, his hand went to it. The car rolled south, steady and low. Fields blurred by. Signs pointed toward Inverarray, then Loch Gilphead. At one point he passed a parked lorry and the driver gave a short wave. Malcolm lifted 2 fingers in return. Rain thickened and softened. The road narrowed. The land changed, less urban, more elemental. Sheep appeared near the shoulders, standing dumb in the mist. Gorse lined the edges in stubborn green. The air tasted different, too. Not city rain, but something older. Malcolm cracked the window and let it in. Loch Lomond was long and black under the clouds. Trees dipped their roots toward the water. The road tightened and rose. Malcolm drove with both hands on the wheel, steady, eyes forward. He passed a lay-by with a caravan and a woman boiling water beside it. Smoke rose in a fine ribbon. A dog barked once, then stopped. Past Inverarray, the hills began to swell. More sheep. Bracken. The sort of green you only get where there's no heat. Malcolm slowed behind a tractor for 20 minutes. He didn't try to pass. He watched the mud on its tires fling up in arcs, the driver hunched forward under a flat cap. The radio stayed off. Rain faded to mist, then back to rain again. Water streamed down rock faces. Some of it broke into waterfalls. Not tall, just persistent. He crossed a narrow bridge over a river with no name. The water ran fast. He heard it under the tires. The map flapped once from the passenger seat. He reached over and set the thermos on it to keep it still. At a petrol station, he refilled the tank, paid in cash, didn't speak more than a thank you. The clerk wore earbuds and nodded at something Malcolm couldn't hear. He took a moment before getting back in the car, stood beside it, stretched his back, looked toward the hills. There was a pull to the light now, the strange slant it took in that part of the country, not golden, not warm, just sharp and angled, like something trying to cut through the cloud. He drove again. The road narrowed more, turned coastal. Then the sea came into view, cold and gray, flecked white where it broke on stone. Gulls floated above, not moving much. They let the air carry them. Malcolm turned the heater down. He preferred the cold. It kept him aware. Each mile felt slower now, as if time had thickened. He followed the curves of the land like they meant something, and maybe they did. The road dipped once more before Campbeltown came into view. Low rooftops, chimneys, and the faint red smudge of rust on old corrugated sheds. The town didn't rise, it hunched. Malcolm slowed. The rain had stopped but left the road slick. A boy rode a bicycle across the square. A woman smoked outside the co-op. Neither looked up. He passed the harbor. Fishing boats bobbed on ropes like they always had. Ropes soaked in salt and thyme. Lobster pots were stacked in lopsided towers near the pier. Gulls walked the quay like they owned it. The Volvo turned up a lane narrower than he remembered. He shifted into second. Stone walls closed in on both sides, patched with moss and lichen. He passed the church where his parents were married, though it had been boarded since the late 90s. A cross still clung to the steeple. It leaned slightly like it wanted down. At the end of the lane, the house came into view. The roof was intact, but just. Ivy had crept halfway up the chimney. One window shutter hung sideways, barely attached. The garden was more a field now. Long grass, nettles, bits of forgotten wood. The barn slouched behind it like a drunk relative. He parked by the stone wall and cut the engine. Silence settled. Not total. The wind was still there. The sea still moved. But no motors, no city hum. Just breath and earth and tide. He stepped out. The air hit different. Not just colder, but older. Smelled of salt, wet stone, peat smoke somewhere far off. He stood for a moment beside the car. Then he opened the boot and took out a single suitcase. A canvas bag, military green, worn at the seams. The house key was still on the same iron hook above the door. Rusted, stubborn. He had to jiggle it twice before it turned. The door creaked open like it had rehearsed the moment. Inside was dim. Dust floated in the air. The floorboards held the shape of old footprints. The smell was exactly as he remembered. Smoke, wool, and a ghost of whiskey soaked into the grain of the walls. He set the bag down, took off his coat. Then he walked through the quiet hall, down past the pantry door, and out through the back, toward the barn. The wind met him halfway. He didn't flinch. He unlatched the barn door. It stuck, then gave with a groan. Darkness, damp wood. Somewhere beneath a tarp, under decades of dust and salt air, the copper waited. The kitchen light didn't work. Malcolm flipped the switch twice, then let it be. The fuse box would have to wait. A soft gray light came through the small window above the sink. Enough to see by. The enamel stove was still there, white with rusted corners. An old kettle sat on one burner. Beside it, the counter was bare except for a cracked jar of salt and a dead fly stuck to the inside rim. He opened the cupboard above the sink. 2 mugs, one chipped, a tin of something. He turned it over. Black treacle, long expired. He put it back. The tap gave a weak cough, then let out a thin line of brown water. He let it run until it cleared, then shut it off. The pipes groaned. In the sitting room, the hearth was black with soot. Someone had left a bundle of dry twigs in a box near the grate. He crouched and ran a hand along the inside wall of the fireplace. The brick was cool. The flue had been kept open. Upstairs the smell changed. The air was heavy, damp wool, old leather, and dust. A moth fluttered when he opened the door to the bedroom. The curtains hadn't been drawn in years. The bed frame was iron, still solid. The mattress sagged. A tartan blanket was folded at the foot. Its pattern faded to the color of smoke. He sat on the edge of the bed. It creaked once. He didn't bounce, just sat, hands on knees, eyes fixed on nothing. There was a small dresser. He opened the top drawer. Receipts. Old yellowed, curling at the corners. Whiskey labels. Some local, some handwritten. One note said, "Barley too raw. Let it sit." Another, "Too much smoke. Tastes like burnt nettle." In the back of the drawer was a small frame. The glass was cracked. Behind it, a photo of a man and a woman standing beside a cooper's cask, laughing. The man was Gregor, younger than Malcolm had ever seen him. The woman was not Malcolm's grandmother. He set it back in the drawer. In the corner of the room was a wardrobe. He opened it. A coat hung there, thick tweed missing a button. He reached out and touched the sleeve. It felt dry, despite the damp. He let the door swing shut on its own. Downstairs again, the light had changed. Lower, grayer. Outside, the barn waited. The door stuck. Malcolm leaned into it with one shoulder. It gave with a low groan, hinges screaming like gulls. Dust rose into his face. He stepped back and waited for the air to clear. The inside smelled of earth and metal. Light slipped in through a seam near the roof, catching motes in the air like ash suspended in water. No power, no bulbs. He stood a moment to let his eyes adjust. There were shelves along one wall, cans, old tools, a pair of boots stiff with age, a rusted saw, a glass jar half full of nails. But the tarp was what he noticed first. It lay across something big in the back of the barn, thrown there years ago and forgotten. The canvas was stiff and brown, crusted with the white bloom of mold. He stepped forward. The floor creaked under his weight, damp wood. A spade leaned against a beam and clattered to the floor as he passed. He reached the tarp and pulled a corner. It came reluctantly, tearing slightly as it moved. He pulled more. Underneath, the copper caught what little light there was. Green in places, brown in others, but still whole. The pot was broad-bellied, the neck long and thin. The line arm sagged slightly at the joint, bent with time. He crouched beside it, ran a hand over the body. It was cold and rough, but unmistakable. Gregor's still. Beside it sat the iron-mashed tun, black with rust, but intact. The inside still carried a sour smell, faint but real. A single barrel leaned nearby, its staves warped from years of disuse. The hoop had split, and one slat had fallen loose. He lifted the lid of the still. It resisted, then gave. Inside, cobwebs. Nothing more. He stood there in silence, not in awe, not nostalgia, just silence. The wind moved against the barn siding, slow and low. He walked a slow circle around the still, examining it. The welds had held. The pipe needed replacing. The spirit safe was missing. But it was all here. It had waited. The shelf sagged under the weight of old things. Most of it was junk. Oil cans, cracked flasks, rags turned stiff with time. But one object stood out, wedged between two bent tins. A book. Leather-bound, thick, the color of dry blood. Its spine was cracked but held. Malcolm pulled it out carefully. A cloud of dust followed. On the cover a name stamped faint in gold. Gregor Struan. He took it to the workbench and set it down. The bench was warped. He had to steady the book with one hand to keep it from sliding. The leather felt warm, worn smooth in places where fingers had pressed over and over. He opened it. The first page was blank, save for a single sentence written in thick black ink. If it doesn't taste like the land, it doesn't deserve the name. The next pages were a mix of things. Tasting notes, barley types, burn temperatures, all scrawled in a looping, uneven hand. Some lines were neat. Others ran wild down the margins, as though written in a hurry or after a drink. There were dates, none recent. 83, 89. One page from 92 was blotted with a whiskey stain in the corner. Malcolm turned page after page. There were drawings, a still diagram, a sketch of a bottle shape, arrows pointing to bits of copper with short, sharp notes. Too thin here and needs better join. One recipe was circled 3 times. Beneath it, Gregor had written, "Third try. Best yet. Let it sit 12 weeks. Got heat, salt, leather. Back of the throat holds peat. Needs Ainsley's Dawes barrel." Malcolm stopped at that. He read it again. The handwriting wasn't shaky yet. It was confident. Intentional. He flipped through the rest more slowly now, scanning for the name. It appeared 5 more times, sometimes just Ainsley's Daw. Once, "Told me never to char too hot. Ainsley's Daw says fire burns memory out. He's right." Malcolm turned to the final page. It was nearly blank. Just a date, 1997. And beneath it, one line. "You can't cheat the wind. You have to let it talk to the cask." He closed the book. The barn was darker now. He stood there, thumb resting on the leather spine, eyes on nothing. The wind pressed against the wall once, hard, then let go. The clouds had thinned but not lifted. The wind had dropped, though it still moved the trees in the distance. Malcolm zipped his coat, slid the journal into his inner pocket. and stepped out of the barn. The lane was quiet, moss-covered stone walls on either side, puddles in the wheel ruts. Sheep watched him from a nearby rise, chewing slowly, eyes flat and curious. The town wasn't far. A 10-minute walk, maybe less, but his boots found their rhythm slowly. The houses leaned into each other. Stone, mostly. Painted doors, green, blue, red, chipped from salt wind. He passed the schoolhouse, still shuttered for the holidays. A boy rode past on a scooter, dragging one foot like he didn't care if he moved at all. At the corner he paused outside the pub, the Gull and Thistle. The windows glowed faintly. A figure moved inside. A woman behind the bar, stacking glasses. He didn't go in. He kept walking. The co-op hadn't changed much. New sign, maybe. Inside, the same smell. Plastic, potatoes, dry air. He took a basket and walked the aisles slowly, picked up tinned herring, beans, oats, coffee, matches, soap, a tin of condensed milk, then paused in front of the biscuits. He reached for the shortbread. Walker's, red plaid box, a shape from his boyhood. He hesitated a moment, then dropped it into the basket. The woman at the till was maybe 20, maybe less. She didn't speak as she rang it through, just looked at him once, then looked away. He paid in cash, took the paper bag in one hand, and stepped back into the wind. The town was closing, shutters rolled down, lights turned off. The sky was going the color of cold steel. He walked back slower than he came. The sea was louder now, not wild, but present, a kind of breathing, slow and endless. At the top of the lane he looked back once. The town was a handful of low lights in the dusk. Beyond it, the black edge of the water. The house was colder than before. The light outside had gone full gray. The kind of dusk that never quite becomes dark, just deeper shades of itself. Malcolm brought the groceries to the kitchen, set them on the counter, didn't bother unpacking. He took the matches, the shortbread, and the whiskey bottle, then walked into the sitting room. The hearth was clean enough. A small pile of twigs and a few split logs sat in the crate nearby. Whoever left them hadn't stayed long after. He knelt, built the kindling with care. The same way Gregor had taught him, cross-hatched, space for breath. The match caught on the second strike. He held it to the edge, waited until the smoke curled, then leaned back. The chimney took it. The fire grew slowly like something waking. Shadows stretched along the floorboards, flickering in rhythm with the flame. He sat in the armchair beside it. The cushion let out dust and air as he settled in. From his coat, he pulled the bottle. The Laphroaig he'd kept for no particular occasion. It was 10 years old, half full. He unscrewed the cap, poured a small measure into the same metal thermos lid he'd used on the drive, held it in his palm. Peat hit first, then salt, then the faint sweetness underneath. He sipped. The warmth bloomed slow, not sharp, just real. Outside, the wind pressed once against the window pane and moved on. He pulled out the journal again, let it rest open in his lap. The pages didn't fall to the middle. They fell to a spot near the front, like the book remembered where it belonged. Malcolm read a few lines without sound, then read one aloud. "The spirit has to taste like the land, or it isn't worth a damn." He said it like a truth, not with reverence, not as a quote, just the way some things are said when there's no one else in the room. The fire cracked once and he didn't move. The barn was colder in the morning. Malcolm lit a candle stub and set it on the workbench. The wax tilted slightly, flame holding steady. He pulled off his coat but kept the sleeves rolled down. Dust had settled again since yesterday. It got into everything. The copper still stood as he left it, silent, watching. He walked a slow circle around it once more. Then he began. He brought in a kettle from the house, filled it, and set it to boil on the old camping burner he'd found under the sink. While it heated, he took a stiff brush and dragged it along the belly of the still. Rust flaked off in small curls. The sound was sharp, rhythmic. He wiped with coarse cloths, blackening them quickly. Boiled water hissed as he poured it over the lid, down the sides. Steam rose in the cold barn, fogging the air. He worked the fittings loose one by one. The line arm, the copper worm, the small riveted cap on the manway. His hands moved slow at first, then found their pace. The memory wasn't conscious. It lived in the wrist, the fingers, the shoulder. When a bolt wouldn't turn, he found an old wrench. When the wrench slipped, he struck it with a mallet. The echo rang through the wood beams overhead. Inside the still, cobwebs folded under steam and rag. He scraped the base clean with a dull chisel, uncovered the copper's shine in thin streaks. Not polished, just honest. He worked until his back ached, then kept working. By mid-afternoon, the still stood cleaner. Not perfect, but ready, or nearly. The line arm had a hairline split at the seam. He touched it gently. It flexed under his thumb. That would need mending. The spirit pipe was missing its joint altogether. He'd need someone to fit that properly. He took a pencil and a torn bit of box and wrote, "Seal at neck, pipe missing, water line rusted, worm coil loose, order mesh, heat uneven." He pinned it to the wall with a bent nail. The flame on the camping burner had gone out. The last of the steam still curled in the air like breath. He sat on the workbench for a long moment, arms on knees, watching the copper. It wasn't ready, neither was he, but he'd started. The path was still there, though the stones had shifted. Grass and heather pushed up between them, wet from rain. Malcolm took the old galvanized bucket from the barn and started up the slope behind the house. The air changed as he climbed, cleaner, wilder, less salt, more bracken and wet earth. The trees were thin and crooked, shaped by years of wind off the sea. Gorse clung to the hillside in bristling patches, its yellow flowers already dulling for autumn. The burn ran just past the fence line. He heard it before he saw it. The soft clatter of water over stone, like small applause. It came down from the hills in a shallow line, winding past mossy rock and broken branches. Not much wider than his arm, but it moved with purpose. The water was brown gold with peat, but clear. He knelt beside it, cupped both hands and drank. It was cold enough to ache in the teeth, sharp, real. He drank again, slower, let it sit in his mouth before swallowing. There was a taste, not sweet, not bitter, just old, like water that remembered something. He dipped the bucket in and filled it. The handle creaked as he lifted it. The walk back was slower. The bucket sloshed with each step. He kept his eyes on the path, not because it was dangerous, but because he liked the sound of his boots on stone. When he reached the house, he set the bucket beside the barn door. He didn't say anything, just looked at it a moment. The water sat still dark in the metal, ready for use. He lit the stove in the kitchen and made a cup of tea. With the burn water, just to see. It tasted like smoke and rain and iron. He didn't smile, but he drank it all. The wood stacked behind the barn was damp. Malcolm split what he could with a hatchet and brought it inside. Kindling first, dry twigs, some peat, old paper from a box of receipts he hadn't yet sorted. He crouched under the still and checked the firebox. Rust flaked off at the corners, but the iron grating held. The ash from the last burn, decades old, was still there in a thin layer, like memory. He cleared it, then stacked the fire carefully, tight enough to catch, loose enough to breathe. The match lit on the first strike. He held it to the paper, watched it curl and blacken. The smoke came before the flame, sour and dry. He blew gently to coax it along. It caught slowly. The damp wood hissed as it took. Flame licked the side of the copper, casting a dull glow against its greenish skin. The barn smelled of wet bark, rust, and old ghosts. Malcolm sat back on a crate, arms crossed, watching the light change. The still made no sound at first. Then, after 20 minutes, a faint groan from the metal as the heat spread. The coil shuddered once. He ran his hand along the copper belly. Warm, not hot. He poured a small amount of the burn water through the top, just to test the flow. It gurgled, caught in the pipe, leaked a little at the join. He made a note to seal it. The smoke thickened, creeping low along the floor, not quite rising. He opened the side door of the barn. Let the air pull it out. The fire burned uneven. One log refused to catch. He turned it with a stick and waited. It didn't matter. This wasn't for product. This was to wake it up, to let the copper remember what it was. Outside, the wind rattled the loose boards once, then moved on. He stayed with the fire until the last log cracked in half. Then he let it die. The still had spoken, and just once, just faint, but it was enough. The grain came from a sack in the corner. Barley, mostly, aged but not spoiled. He crushed it by hand, using a cracked hand mill Gregor had kept on the barn shelf. It squealed as he turned the handle, grain grinding slow between the stones. He didn't know the ratios, not exactly. He guessed. He added a scoop more peat than he meant to. The flakes darkened the mash to a muddy gray. It smelled right at first, earthy, smoky, like wet loam, but strong, too strong. He let it sit overnight in a blue plastic tub, covered with an old tea towel and the weight of his expectations. In the morning, he lit the fire again. It took easier this time. The wood had dried some by the hearth. He poured the wash into the still. The copper hissed as it filled. The joints dripped a little, but the flow held. He waited. Heat rose. The first drops came slow, then more. The spirit safe was just a jar for now. An old glass pickle jar sat under the pipe. The smell filled the barn quickly. Not sweet, not rich. Something harsher. Acrid. He let the run go too long, unsure of where the cut should have been. The late drip smelled of smoke and vinegar. When it was done, he turned off the flame and let the copper cool. He poured a finger's worth into a glass. Let it sit. Then, slowly, he drank. It was sharp, too hot. The smoke was bitter, not deep. It burned the back of his throat and left nothing behind. No finish, no memory, just heat and silence. He didn't spit it out, but he didn't drink more. He opened Gregor's journal to a blank space and wrote, "First run, too much peat, cut too late. Tastes like burnt paper." He underlined it twice and then sat back, glass still in hand, looking at the copper like it had insulted him. But it hadn't. It had just told the truth. The light was going when he left the house. Clouds had thickened again, the sky pressed low. The smell of burnt mash still clung to his clothes. He didn't change. He didn't care. The road into town felt shorter this time. Familiar. The way a glove does after the second wear. Campbeltown was quiet. A few cars parked near the post office. A gull picked at something in the gutter. The wind moved papers along the curb like reluctant dancers. The Gull and Thistle had its door half open. A light above it flickered and stayed on. He stepped in. The heat was thick, too warm. The smell of old beer, wood polish, and damp coats. 3 men sat along the bar. One table held a couple playing dominoes. No one spoke much. The woman behind the bar looked up, mid-40s, sharp face, hair tied back in a bandana. She didn't smile. Malcolm stepped to the bar, stood there a second longer than he needed to. She waited. He pointed to the bottle on the back shelf, local label, one he hadn't seen in years. "Single," he said. She poured it neat and set it down. No words, no nod. He took it and sat at the end of the bar. The glass felt right in his hand, heavy base, cool. He drank. It was good. Not great, but honest. A little heat, some caramel under it. Not much smoke. Not enough. Someone muttered near the bar's midpoint. A name. His. He didn't turn. He drank again. The woman wiped the bar with slow, practiced movements. The men spoke low, voices buried under the hum of the refrigeration unit. He drained the glass, set it down with care. No one asked him anything. He left a 5-pound note beside it. The woman took it without looking. Rain had started again when he stepped outside, fine and slanting. Not heavy enough for an umbrella, just enough to find the cracks in his collar. He walked home, slow. The wind picked up near the lane. The sea sounded closer. When he reached the house, the fire in the hearth was out. He didn't relight it. The road out of town narrowed past the last row of houses. After that, it turned to track, gravel packed by generations of boots, hooves, and tires. Malcolm walked with his hands in his coat pockets, bucket swinging at his side, empty. The sack of grain would be heavier on the way back, if Ewan gave him any. The wind was quieter this morning, just a low constant, the kind that never stopped, only shifted direction. The schoolhouse still stood where it always had. Half stone, half whitewash, the bell tower long since removed. He slowed near it. The door was boarded, but the windows remained. Glass smudged, not broken. He could still remember Ewan sitting in the second row, legs too long for the desk, always carving lines into the wood with a bit of nail. Farther up the track, fields opened on either side. Sheep here, barley there. The land wasn't flat, but it wasn't dramatic either. Just rolling, worked, and real. The McBride farm gate hung loose on one hinge. The wood was silver with age, and the paint, once blue, had peeled away in flakes the size of coins. A collie barked once and ran toward him. Not aggressive, just alert. It stopped short, sniffed, then circled back toward the shed. Ewan was crouched beside the back wheel of a red Massey Ferguson, arm deep in grease. His hair had thinned but hadn't gone gray. A wool cap sat crooked on his head, oil-stained jumper rolled to the elbows. He didn't look up right away. Malcolm stopped just inside the gate. The dog watched him, tail still. "Didn't think you'd show," Ewan said finally, still under the wheel arch. "I said I might." That was 3 years ago. Malcolm didn't answer. Ewan stood, wiped his hands on a rag. His face hadn't changed much, just thickened at the jaw. Same eyes, same unreadable half-grin. "Still smell like the city," he said. "And you still smell like diesel." That got half a breath of a laugh. Maybe less. Ewan turned back toward the shed. "Come on, then." The shed door creaked as Ewan pushed it open. A coil of wire fell from the top shelf and hit the ground with a flat, tired sound. He stepped over it like it wasn't there. Malcolm followed him into the gloom. The inside was familiar. The thick air, the smell of hay and old oil. The light filtered through gaps in the roof like smoke. Ewan turned and leaned against the wall, arms crossed. They hadn't been in a room together in 20 years. No handshake. "You're not here on holiday," Ewan said. "No." "You sell the company?" "I did." "Why?" Malcolm shrugged. "Didn't want it anymore." Ewan tilted his head like he didn't buy that but wasn't going to dig. "You come back for the house then?" "For the still." That gave Ewan a pause, not surprise, just a shift behind the eyes. "Gregor's?" "Yes." "Didn't think it'd still be there." "It was." Ewan looked at him a long moment. He scratched at his chin, left a smear of grease. "You going to try making something?" "I already have." "Any good?" "No." That brought the first real sound out of Ewan, something between a scoff and a grunt. "Right," he said. "Well, no one starts with good. I was hoping for better than what I made. You always were impatient." Malcolm didn't answer. He looked around the shed, at the rows of seed bags, the piles of tools, the walls marked with dates and initials going back decades. "You still running the same field?" he asked. "Mostly. Rotating with oats some years. Lost half of it last spring." Too much water. And the wind's gone odd. Comes earlier now. Malcolm nodded, though he wasn't sure what that meant. Ewan pushed off the wall. "Come on," he said. "I'll show you what I've got." The field wasn't far. They crossed a paddock, climbed a stile made from 2 uneven planks, and stepped into the edge of it. The barley swayed in the wind, slow and heavy-headed. The stalks were pale gold with a touch of green, the husks dry, whispering against each other like pages being turned too fast. Ewan walked with his hands in his pockets. He didn't look at Malcolm. Just the grain. "Didn't think I'd still be planting it," he said. "No one wants local anymore. Not really. The big places say they do, but it's for the story, not the taste." Malcolm said nothing. Ewan reached down, pulled a head of barley from a stalk, and rolled it between his fingers. "Last year, rabbits chewed half the edge. Year before, we had a late frost. Never used to get frost that late." He dropped the husks to the ground. "Still," he said, "it grows." You can't argue with that. They walked along the edge. A low stone wall bordered the far side, moss growing thick between the rocks. "You going to do it proper?" Ewan asked. "Or just play at it?" "I haven't decided yet," Ewan snorted. "If you haven't decided, it'll cost you twice as much." They stopped at the wall. Ewan turned to face him. "What are you after exactly?" "A sack," Malcolm said. "Something to start with." Ewan looked past him, toward the barn, as if calculating. "I've got some from the last harvest. Dried, not malted. Won't win prizes, but it'll ferment." "That's enough," Ewan nodded. "Come on, then." He turned back toward the shed without waiting. The wind moved the barley again behind them. Neither man looked back. The second shed was darker than the first, its door hanging on a leather strap nailed into the lintel. The wood had warped with age, slanted inward like it was bowing to something no one could see. Ewan went in first. Malcolm ducked under the frame behind him. Inside, the air was colder. No windows, just thin cracks where the daylight leaked through. The smell of grain hit him immediately. Ewan bent beside a low rack, pulled a sack from underneath a bench with both hands. The canvas rasped against the wood, and dust followed it into the air. He lifted it in one easy motion and dropped it into Malcolm's arms. It landed heavy. "Dry," Ewan said, stone-milled, old-fashioned. Like Gregor liked it. Malcolm adjusted his grip, finding the balance. "It'll work." Ewan leaned back against the bench, crossed his arms, studied him. "You remember what you're doing?" "Some of it. And the rest? No, I'll figure it out." Ewan raised an eyebrow, not quite skeptical, not quite amused. "Gregor wouldn't have used that soft shite you're drinking now." Malcolm looked down at the sack, then back up. "He didn't ask me first." That earned him the ghost of a grin. They stood a moment longer, the silence not awkward, just there. Ewan nodded once toward the door. "That'll be enough to disappoint yourself 3 or 4 times. More if you stretch it." "I won't stretch it." Ewan pushed off the bench and started out of the shed. Malcolm followed. The sack rode high on his shoulder, pressing into the bone. He shifted it once, then again. No use. It was going to hurt either way. Ewan had said nothing more as he left, just turned back to his tractor, already under the hood again. Sleeves rolled. The dog hadn't barked. Malcolm stepped over the stile and back onto the track. His boots sank slightly into the clay, soft from the last rain. He kept his head down. Wind from the west pushed the fields flat and moved the barley in slow, sweeping arcs. The sky was close now. Low clouds, no shape, just one thick sheet. The road curved between 2 hills where the stone fence broke. And there he stopped. Set the sack down on the wall, one arm resting on it. The sea was just visible in the far distance, a flat, dull gray under the horizon. No boats, just water and sky and the line between them. The wind had a sound here, not a howl, not a whistle, more like a voice trying not to speak. He stayed there a while, didn't light a cigarette, didn't reach for a drink, just watched. Then he picked up the sack again and kept walking. The cooperage sat low and square against the wind, its roofline tucked under the hill like it didn't trust the sky. Char marked the stone black in long, soft smears, like smoke had left fingerprints. The front door was thick oak, weathered down to gray, bolted with iron. A rusted sign hung crooked beside it. Malcolm stepped inside. The smell struck first. Deep wood, scorched sugar, salt air, and steel. Not unpleasant. Just strong. Light came in from high windows, thin and sharp. The tools were old, real. Hanging on pegs along the wall, crowses, adzes, chivs. The kind most people wouldn't recognize, even if they'd been raised around them. He walked past a half-built barrel on a cradle, hoops hanging loose, staves standing like ribs. At the far end of the room, a woman was bent over a length of oak, pulling a draw knife slow and clean. The curl of the wood lifted off like ribbon. She didn't look up. He waited. Another pull. Another curl. Then, "You're the one playing distiller in Gregor Struan's barn." The voice was low even, not unfriendly. Malcolm stepped closer. "Depends who's asking." She straightened, set the knife down, wiped her hands on her apron. "Ainsley Cairn," she said. He already knew the name. She wasn't tall, but she stood like someone who didn't need to be. Her hair was tied back under a dark red scarf. Streaks of ash dust marked her sleeves. Her eyes were gray, not the pale kind. The kind that held weather. "I heard you've got barrels," Malcolm said, "and I've got a used one." He smiled, barely. She didn't, but her eyes lingered on him a second longer than needed. "You want it?" she asked. "I want to see it." "Follow me then." She turned and walked toward the back room. He followed, and she didn't look over her shoulder to check if he was keeping up. The back room was colder. Light came from a single bare bulb. Its wire twisted along the ceiling beam. Stacks of casks lined one wall, some full, some notched and patched, others left open like mouths waiting for breath. In the center was a single hogshead, set apart on two low blocks. Ainsley walked to it, rested her hand on the rim. "Re-charred last winter," she said. "American oak. Had sherry in it before that. Could have sold it to a tourist for twice what it's worth." "Why didn't you?" "Because they wouldn't know what to do with it. You might if you don't ruin it." She stepped back, gave him room. Malcolm moved to the barrel, ran his fingers along the side. The wood was warm from old fires, edges blackened just slightly. The hoops had been refit, tight and clean. He tapped the top lightly with his knuckles. "It'll hold," she said, "and you're sure?" "I don't guess with oak." He looked at her. She looked back. "I'm not making much yet," he said. "I know. I've had a few tries." "Gregor ruined his first 8, she said, and then called the 9th a mistake worth bottling. "You remember that?" "I remember the taste." They stood quiet for a moment. "I'll take it," Malcolm said. She nodded once. "Cash." He pulled the envelope from his coat pocket and counted it out onto the work table nearby. She didn't check the amount, just picked up the notes and slid them into a tin. He gestured to the cask. "Need a hand loading it?" "You think I can't lift it?" "I think I'd rather not watch you try to impress me." That earned the smallest flicker of something. Not quite a smile, but close. She turned without answering, walked out toward the loading bay. Malcolm followed. The loading bay doors opened outward, and the wind came through with a low, salt breath. Ainsley had rolled the barrel ahead of him. It rocked slightly on the concrete, not unsteady, just waiting. Malcolm crouched beside it, ran his hand along the grain. The char was clean. Not too deep. Enough to hold something strong. Maybe even something true. "She's true now," Ainsley said, standing over him. "She's in good shape." He looked up at her. She. Every barrel's a she. Like boats and grief. He gave a short nod, still crouched. "What happens if she leaks?" "You lose everything and learn not to be a fool twice." He stood. And if she holds? You get to wait 3 years before you find out whether you've wasted your time or not. The wind moved her scarf slightly. A strand of hair slipped loose against her cheek, and she didn't brush it away. It'll leak if you don't know what you're doing, she said again, voice flatter now. I don't, Malcolm said. This time she looked at him. She didn't smile, but she didn't correct him either. The barrel thumped into the boot of the Volvo with a final hollow sound. They'd rolled it together. No words, no counting. She took the back end, he took the front. It moved like it knew where it was going. Malcolm stepped back and brushed sawdust from his coat. The tailgate hung open. Ainsley stood beside it, arms folded, breath showing in the late afternoon air. She looked at the barrel once more. You're sure you've got somewhere to keep it? I've got a barn. That's not the same as a warehouse. I'm not a warehouse man. She gave a small shrug. He reached into his pocket and handed her the rest of the cash. Notes folded clean, edges worn. She took them without looking down. Appreciate it, he said, and don't ruin it. Her tone wasn't sharp, but it wasn't soft either. It landed like a challenge that wouldn't be repeated. He nodded. Not a promise, just a receipt of warning. She turned then, pulled a pack of cigarettes from her apron pocket, tapped one free, lit it with a scratched metal lighter. He shut the tailgate. The latch clicked. When he looked at her again, she was watching him through the smoke. She didn't wave. He didn't either. The Volvo started on the first turn. He pulled away slow, the rear of the car lower with the barrel's weight. In the rearview mirror, the cooperage grew small behind him. And Ainsley was still there, cigarette in hand, eyes fixed on the road. Just before he turned the corner, she flicked the ash with her thumb. The barrel made a dull sound as it rolled out of the boot and hit the barn floor. Not a thud, something more rounded, like the sound of something old returning to its place. Malcolm guided it slowly, hand on the rim, boot against the edge to keep it steady. He didn't rush. The floor was uneven, the wood soft in places. Dust rose with each shift. He rolled it past the mash tun, past the crate of failed bottles, until it came to rest beside the still. There it stopped, perfect balance. He crouched beside it, rested one hand on the charred rim, the other on the cold copper of the still. The two touched, not quite, a finger's width between them. He stayed there a while, just listening to the quiet. Rain started outside, soft at first, then more steady. The barn roof caught it in a rhythm, not fast, not slow. Just time, falling. When he finally rose, he left the barrel where it was. Inside the house, the hearth still held the memory of the last fire. He didn't light a new one. He set Gregor's journal on the table, opened it to a blank page. The pen scratched slow, deliberate. The cooper's daughter knows what I don't. She said it would leak. She might be right. He capped the pen, closed the book. Outside, the sea moved in the dark. The sack from Ewan sat folded near the barn door, mostly empty now. Malcolm took the last of it, weighed it by feel, and poured it into the hand mill in small turns. The metal groaned as it ground. The dust rose warm and bitter in the still air. He worked without rushing. This time he measured the water twice, took it straight from the burn early in the morning before the sun touched it. The bucket sweated cold all the way down the hill. He stirred slow, let the grain bloom. The mash thickened and loosened again. The smell was better this time. More earth than rot, more sugar than smoke. He let it rest longer. Just sat beside it on an upturned crate, watching the light shift through the cracks in the wall. Gregor's journal sat open on the bench, not on the recipe pages, but near the back, where the handwriting turned tighter, angled inward, like a voice talking to itself. One line, written with more space around it than the rest. The Aya Kumel Rudan nach Isle Sin Atuigzin. He didn't speak Gaelic. He could guess parts, but not enough. Still he underlined it. Not because he understood it, because it felt like something that mattered. The axe hadn't been used in years. He found it in the back of the shed, head rusted, handle smooth with old sweat. He oiled the blade, wrapped the grip in tape, and carried it to the stand of birch behind the house. The trees gave easily. The ground was soft from rain. He split the logs by hand, neat strokes, no waste, laid the pieces along the stone wall where the sun caught them in the late day. Let them sit. 3 days, then 4. Turned them each morning. When he burned them, the smoke was thinner, blue, not gray. The fire came slower, steadier. No hissing, no angry flare. The copper warmed without complaint. Malcolm kept the heat low. He'd marked the thermometer but didn't watch it. He watched the still itself, how it creaked, how it settled. Gregor's notes had said, "It's ready when it breathes steady." Not before. When the spirit started to drip, he caught it in a fresh jar. Not the old one, a new one. He smelled it, touched a drop to his tongue, then cut early, before the burn rose too sharp. The fire held, the drip slowed. He let the rest run out into waste, didn't chase the last of it. He poured the jar into a sealed stone bottle and let it sit. Then he doused the flame and wiped his hands on the towel Gregor used to hang on the nail by the workbench. It still hung there, still remembered the shape of his hand. 2 days passed, rain in the morning, mist in the afternoon. He didn't touch the stone bottle during that time, didn't uncork it, didn't even look at it more than once. He kept busy, fixed a shutter on the house, sanded the splintered bench outside the kitchen door, walked to the co-op for more matches, bought another packet of shortbread without thinking. But by the 3rd night, he was ready. He carried the bottle back into the barn. The fire wasn't lit. He didn't need it. The cold helped him think. He sat on the same crate he always used, the one that leaned just slightly to the left. Set the bottle on the floor, brought out one clean glass, uncorked it. No fanfare, just a sound like breath leaving a tight room. He poured a finger's width. Held it up in the light that slipped through the high slats. It wasn't amber. Not yet. It was clear with a faint yellow cast, like something just beginning to remember color. He brought it to his nose, peat, but not the bitter kind. Smoke, yes, but wrapped around something gentler, like salt air through dry wool. He sipped. The heat came first and as expected, but it didn't claw. It moved in, took its time. There was grain in it, the memory of soil. Then a finish, faint, peaty, clean. He held it on his tongue a moment longer, then swallowed. The barn stayed quiet, the still beside him cold, watching. He didn't pour another, and he just sat with it. After a while, he reached for the journal, opened to a clean page, wrote 3 words. She held it, then closed the book. The knock came late, not night, but past the hour when most people called. The light outside had gone blue, the kind of hour where the sea loses its shape. Malcolm opened the barn door. Ainsley stood there, one hand in her coat pocket, the other holding an iron clamp, grease still dark around the threads. "This was your grandfather's," she said. "Borrowed it years ago. Thought I should bring it back before you built a myth around it." He took it without a word. It was heavier than it looked. She stepped inside without being asked. Her boots knocked bits of dried mud off onto the floor. She looked around, not like a guest, like someone checking the corners of her own place after too long away. The cask caught her eye first. "You filled it," she said. "I did." "New run?" He nodded. "First, that didn't offend me." She walked over, crouched beside it, ran her hand across the side the way he had. "You naming it?" "Not yet." She stood, turned toward him. "Well?" He reached for the stone bottle, uncorked it, poured a small measure into a clean glass, held it out. She took it without a word, brought it to her nose, eyes narrowed, waited, then sipped. She didn't move at first, didn't speak, just let it sit. Then a single nod. Slow. "That's not terrible," she said. Wasn't meant to be. Another small sip. She set the glass down on the bench. You cut early. I did. Gregor always cut late. He was a stubborn bastard. He was. Their eyes met then. Something unsaid passed between them. Not fondness, not yet, but recognition. She stepped back toward the door. Don't put it in the bottle too fast. It's got more to say. I'll listen. She paused at the threshold, met his eyes and smiled, then stepped out without another word. Malcolm stood at the open door, watching her silhouette move against the soft light. She hadn't gone yet. Ainsley lingered beside the threshold, one boot resting on the edge of the step, the other still in the barn. The wind touched the hem of her coat. She didn't pull it tighter. You notice the way the gulls have been flying lately? She asked. No. Low, sharp turns means a storm's likely. He looked out toward the west. The sky was smeared pale, cloudless but unsettled. You always believe birds over forecasts? He asked. They don't lie as much. They stood like that, side by side, but not touching. The barn behind them, the scent of oak and smoke between them. Road past the loch flooded last winter, she said. Took 3 days to clear it. Couldn't get to the shop. I remember that road, still soft near the bend. Don't take it if you don't have to. I won't. Quiet again. She looked out once more, then turned back to him. Her hand reached out and touched the edge of the doorframe. Not deliberate, not performative. Just a fingertip resting there, like someone confirming something was real. She didn't say goodbye. She stepped out into the wind. He didn't call after her. Just stood there, watching the place her fingers had touched. After she was gone, he closed the door slowly. Let the latch click into place. The rain had picked up again. A slow, steady kind. No wind, just weight. Malcolm worked in the barn. No plan. Just moving things. Sorting shelves. Sweeping what could be swept. He shifted a stack of old crates near the back wall, most of them splintered or soft with rot. Behind them, in the darkest corner where the roof slanted low, he saw it. A barrel. Not stored, not displayed, just left. Dust thick on the head, a line of cobwebs strung from one hoop to the beam above. It was smaller than the one he'd bought from Ainsley, a blood tub, maybe 30 liters. He crouched beside it, brushed his hand across the top. The dust came away slow. Beneath it, burned into the head, were 3 letters, GSS Gregor Struan. He ran his fingers around the rim. The wood was dry, but not cracked. The bung was sealed with a dark wax, the color of dried blood. He didn't open it. He didn't even move it, just sat beside it for a long while. The barn was quiet, except for the slow tap of rain on the tin roof. The smell of the old wood had begun to rise, sweet, faintly bitter, like something preserved, waiting. The journal was on the table next to a cooling mug of tea and an untouched heel of bread. Malcolm flipped through it carefully, not just looking, but listening to the feel of the pages. Some were stiff with old moisture, others soft at the edges. The binding creaked. He knew what year to look for. Gregor had been most active in the early 90s, working small, testing peat levels, playing with new woods. Some of the entries were manic, scrawled side notes, half recipes, taste descriptions that read more like confessions than observations. He found the mention in a page dated June 1992. The handwriting was tight, focused. The ink, darker than the surrounding entries. Ran narrow batch, smaller than usual, took only the early cut, used the burn water, let it breathe in oak soaked with first-pressed sherry. Not sure what I've made. Then a space, a line skipped, not ready, not yet. Not sure it ever will be. No cask number, no name, no final note. Just a thin line drawn across the page in pencil. He flipped through the weeks after. No follow-up. No mention of bottling or blending or storage. Nothing. As if Gregor had distilled it, sealed it, and stopped speaking of it. Malcolm closed the book, sat still for a moment, then turned it around and reread the entry, this time slower. Not sure what I've made. Not sure it ever will be ready. He looked out the window. The rain had slowed. The barn sat quiet beyond the glass, dark against the soft green hill. The cask was still waiting. The kettle hissed low, and the mugs on Ewan's kitchen table were mismatched. One was chipped. The other still had the logo of a feed supplier printed half-worn on the side. Malcolm didn't bring up the cask right away. They talked about sheep first. Ewan had lost 2 to a fence that blew down in a storm the week before. He blamed the wind, the contractor, and the sheep in that order. Then a mention of new fencing wire. Then silence. It stretched until it folded in on itself, comfortable in its own shape. Malcolm set his mug down. "I found something," he said. Ewan raised an eyebrow. "A barrel, small, still sealed, in the barn." Ewan didn't speak right away. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. Looked out the window. "You open it?" "Not yet." "Good." Malcolm waited. Ewan took a slow drink, set the mug down without sound. "There was talk," he said. "Toward the end. Gregor made a batch no one tasted. Wouldn't pour it for the boys. Wouldn't write it down, far as I know." "Why not?" "He said it wasn't ready. Said it might never be. Said it wasn't whiskey, not yet." "What was it?" Ewan shrugged. "Didn't say. I think he didn't know." Malcolm watched him. "You helped him age it?" "No, he did that himself. I think he put it aside when his wife passed. Lost the taste for sharing after that." The wind moved the window glass slightly in its frame. Ewan added, "Quieter now. When he died, we cleared some things. Thought about burning the barn down, if I'm honest. It was half rot and bad memory. But we didn't. Left it. Left the cask, too. Figured he meant to be forgotten, that part." Malcolm nodded. They drank in silence for a while. Then Ewan said, "If you do open it, don't pour it like any other dram. You won't be drinking alone." It was late when he lit the lantern. No fire in the hearth that night, just the soft hiss of the flame behind glass, casting gold along the barn walls. The rain had stopped. The wind hadn't. The cask sat where he'd left it, half in shadow, the bung wax sealed, the wood stained dark with time. Malcolm pulled up the crate, brought the bottle, brought the glass, brought nothing else. He sat beside it, laid his hand flat against the head. The wood was cool. He took out a small knife, worked it under the wax. It peeled in flakes, dry, brittle. When he'd cleared it, he tapped the bung once with the butt of the knife. It didn't move. Again, it gave. He twisted it loose, slow. A small hiss of air escaped, and then the smell rose, thick and deep and strange. Not bad, not rotten, but full. He tilted the cask gently, just enough to draw a small pour into the glass. The liquid ran smooth, darker than it should have been, dark gold, maybe deeper, like something aged in silence. He lifted the glass to his nose. Not just smoke. That came second. First the scent of damp leaves, of black tea, of stone, then peat, but soft, like it had been softened by grief. He drank. It was warm. Then bitter. Then something sweet opened and disappeared again before he could place it. He drank again, slower, not perfect, but true. It didn't taste like anything he'd made. It didn't taste like anything Gregor had written about. It tasted like someone trying to say something and stopping halfway through. The pour had settled. The air in the barn felt different now, not colder, just stiller. Malcolm stared at the glass, then at the cask. The taste still lingered in his mouth. Smoke, salt, the echo of something lost. He turned the glass once in his hand, watching the light catch the edge. Then he set it down. The lantern flickered. A thought passed. A memory of how Gregor used to tap casks with a small mallet. Never rushed, always 3 taps, like a rhythm only he understood. Malcolm rose and circled the barrel. He crouched and ran his hand along the base. The seams were tight, the head solid, but the sound wasn't right. He knocked once, hollow. Knocked again to the left, duller. He pressed his fingers into the groove where the head met the staves. One edge moved slightly, too clean, too deliberate. He fetched the knife again, worked it slow. The false head came free with a low, soft pull. Inside, dry, wrapped in waxed cloth, pressed flat against the inner wood, was a note. He opened it carefully. The wax peeled back like skin. The paper inside was soft but intact. The ink was faded, the script unmistakable. Gregor's. It said only, "If it tastes like the dead, don't drink it alone." Malcolm held the paper a moment longer, then folded it. He set it on the workbench beside the journal, poured a second dram. Not for himself, just set it across from him on the bench, opposite the one he'd already tasted. He didn't touch it, didn't speak, just let it sit, as if someone else might reach for it. The grass hadn't been cut in a while. Malcolm stepped between the headstones, boots brushing through damp blades, past names worn down to near blank slate. The church tower leaned slightly, its bell long gone, the lichen clinging thick to the stones. He knew the spot. 3rd row from the back wall, left side, near the hawthorn tree that had started leaning east sometime in the late 90s. Gregor Struan. The headstone was narrow and square, the name carved deep, no inscription beneath it, no verse, just 2 dates and a name. The stone was dry but streaked with salt white. Rain didn't clean things here, it aged them. Malcolm crouched, then sat on the damp ground, one knee bent, pulled the flask from his coat pocket. He unscrewed it slowly, poured a short dram into the steel cap, then tipped it sideways into the grass beside the grave. The earth drank it. He didn't say anything, didn't feel the need. He took his own sip. The same taste, peat, sweetness, the strange finish that couldn't be named. Wind moved through the hawthorn above. A gull cried once somewhere near the water. He stayed there until the dram was gone and the steel cap was cold in his hand. Then he stood, dusted his hands on his coat, and walked back toward the gate without looking over his shoulder. The gull and thistle smelled of old wood, beer, and something fried that had long since stopped being food. Malcolm took a seat at the end of the bar, same as before. Same stool, same chipped corner in the wood, where a ring had burned through the varnish. The barmaid, same woman as before, same tight bun, same tired eyes, poured him a dram without asking what he wanted. She set it down without comment and walked off. The whiskey was local, decent, no smoke. He drank it slow. Behind him, 2 men sat at a table near the fireplace, loud enough not to be overheard, but soft enough to be heard anyway. One had a voice like old rope. The other coughed between sentences like punctuation. "He's trying to bring it back," one of them said. "Who?" "Gregor's lad. The quiet one. Never spoke much, even as a boy." "Malcolm?" "Aye." A pause. "He's not Gregor," the other said. "No, he's not." Clink of a glass on wood. A throat cleared. "Heard he's got some city money behind him." "Doesn't take money. Takes sense. He's making it in that barn, I heard." "Aye, playing at it." Another pause, then, "Gregor would have hated it, hated the attention, hated the noise." Malcolm didn't turn, didn't finish his drink either. He left the coin on the bar and stepped outside before the next sentence found him. She opened the door with one hand on the frame, her thumb still blackened from char. "Didn't expect you," Ainsley said. "I didn't expect to come." She leaned her weight against the door. Behind her, the cooperage was dark, except for a single lamp above the workbench. Malcolm held out the flask. She didn't take it right away, just looked at it, then at him. "I brought you the one I found," he said. "Gregor's, the sealed one." She crossed her arms, thought, "Is it good?" "It's something." That made her grin, just slightly. "That's not an answer." "No." She reached out and took the flask, turned it in her hand. The metal caught the light. "Still warm," she said. "You just came from it?" "I came from the pub." She raised an eyebrow. "Whispers," he added. "They're always louder than the truth." He nodded, said nothing. She looked at the flask again. "You know some folks don't want this brought back," she said. Malcolm's voice didn't rise. "It never left," he said. Ainsley looked at him for a long moment. No smile now, no frown. Just a stillness, as if weighing something she wouldn't name. She stepped back from the door. "Come on," she said. "I'll show you something." The path behind the cooperage was narrow, overgrown with nettle and dockleaf, the stones uneven underfoot. Ainsley led him through without looking back. She moved like someone who'd made the walk 100 times and never once tripped. At the end stood a low stone outbuilding, roof sagging under a drift of moss. She unlatched the door with a metal pin, pushed it open. Inside, the smell hit like a wall. Char, iron, old smoke and burnt sugar, something near to leather. A rack of hoops hung from the rafters. A pile of staves lay in the corner, some cracked, some still sweating sap. She struck a match, lit a shallow fire in a metal trough. The flames crawled slow at first, then caught. "The wood talks," she said, her voice lower now, almost to herself. "When it starts to burn. That first sound, that pop, that's the water leaving. Everything after that's just memory leaving with it." Malcolm stood beside her, watching the flame catch on the edges of a stave she'd set across the heat. It snapped once, a dry, tight sound. "See?" she said. He nodded. She reached for a hoop. He moved to help, hands catching the far edge. Their fingers touched. Just a brush, but enough to feel the heat from her palm. She didn't pull away. He didn't say anything. Together, they lowered the hoop into the trough, let the flame kiss the metal. It hissed, high and soft. Neither of them looked at the other. They didn't need to. The door closed behind him with a soft metal click. No words had passed after the flame was out. She'd handed him the empty flask, clean and dry. Their eyes met, and that had been enough. He stepped into the night. The road was empty. The sky hung low, heavy with unfallen rain. No stars, no moon, just the smell of peat smoke in the wind, and salt hanging faint at the back of his throat. He walked slow. The flask felt lighter than before. Not because it was empty, but because something had been shared. Past the fields, the fence line, the crooked stile. The sea was out there, just beyond view, moving even when unseen. He remembered a line from Gregor's journal. It wasn't dated, just scrawled into the margin beside a list of mash temps and cuts. "It has to taste like the land, or it doesn't belong." He hadn't understood it then. Now he almost did. The wind picked up, not harsh, just steady. He let it push at his back. When the barn came into view, its low roof outlined in shadow, he paused. Just stood there, listening. Not to anything in particular, just to the quiet that follows fire. The table was covered in pages, loose sheets, notebooks, Gregor's ledgers, new invoices, old bank statements. None of them lined up, not in the way that counted. Malcolm sat with a pencil behind his ear, the end of it chewed soft. The numbers didn't lie. Barley cost more than he thought it would, even with Ewan giving him fair rates. Cooperage supplies weren't cheap either. The still needed a new seal. Fuel for the boiler came dearer every month. He'd sold the shipping company, yes. And it had bought him this. The barn, the copper, the quiet. But money moved fast when the whiskey didn't. 3 years. That was the law, no way around it. The ghost barrel was a relic. His own cask had only just been filled. It would sit in the dark, aging slowly while the cost of everything else rose around it. He looked at the figure at the bottom of the page again, then crossed it out. Tried to rewrite it with better guesses. Crossed it out again. The silence of the room wasn't peaceful tonight. It pressed. Gregor's journal lay open beside the figures. He didn't touch it. Not yet. He flipped back through his own notes instead. Mash bills, cuts, water quality, tasting impressions. In the margins he'd once written, all or nothing. No shortcuts. It looked naive now. He shut the notebook, rubbed his eyes. Outside, the wind picked up again. It carried the scent of salt and cold peat. And beneath that, a quiet truth. Dreams age slower than bank accounts. The knock was sharp, not tentative. 3 quick raps with a rhythm too practiced to be local. Malcolm opened the door. The man on the step wore a dark wool coat, tailored clean to the shoulder. Polished boots. No umbrella, but not wet. He had the look of someone who timed his steps between raindrops. "Mr. Struan?" Malcolm gave a short nod. "Campbell Byers," the man said, offering a card. "I represent Echelon Spirits, Edinburgh." Malcolm didn't take the card. Byers smiled anyway. Not warm, not cold, just professional. "I was in Argyll this week visiting an estate outside Oban. I thought I'd drop by. I hope that's all right." Malcolm stepped back. Didn't say it was, just moved far enough for him to enter. Byers looked around as he stepped in, the way a man does when he already knows what he'll see. "Charming," he said. "Spare, very authentic." Malcolm didn't offer tea, didn't speak. The broker took a small black notebook from his coat and opened it with care. "We've heard rumors," he said. "Something old. Something untouched. Something in a barn." Malcolm's eyes didn't move. "We specialize in heritage casks," Byers went on. "One-off releases. Authentic backstory. We keep the labels minimal. Maybe a pencil sketch of the coastline. A facsimile of your grandfather's signature. Nothing dramatic." He smiled again. "We can offer you £20,000 for the barrel. We bottle it under your grandfather's name. The story's yours, of course. You remain the soul of the brand." Malcolm looked at the floor. "You haven't tasted it," he said. "Doesn't matter. Don't you want to know what it is?" "We already know what it needs to be," Byers said. "That's the business." Malcolm walked to the hearth, picked up a piece of kindling, turned it once in his hand. "I'm not selling it." "No." "No." Byers paused, then sighed through his nose and tucked the notebook away. He set the business card on the table. As he turned to go, he stopped at the door and looked back. "Mr. Struan," he said, voice still smooth, "no one buys a dream." A beat, then they buy a story. Then he left. Malcolm didn't touch the card and didn't watch him walk away. The cooperage was louder than usual. Malcolm stood just inside the door, one hand on the frame, watching Ainsley work a fresh hoop onto a half-cured cask. The steel creaked as it slipped over the staves, tight and precise. She didn't look up. "I had a visitor," he said. "From where?" "Edinburgh. Broker. Wants to buy the ghost barrel." That made her pause just a beat. Then the mallet struck once clean. "You say yes?" "No." Another strike. "He say what he'd do with it?" "Bottle it under Gregor's name, make it look old, sell it as a legacy." She set the mallet down, turned to face him. "And you told him no." "I did." She wiped her hands with a rag, stepped closer, not angry in the face, but something sharp behind the eyes. "How long did you think about it?" He didn't answer. "That long, huh?" "I didn't take his money." "That's not what I asked." Silence. She looked down, shook her head once, slow. "You don't get to stand in Gregor's barn and shrug, Malcolm." His jaw tensed. "I didn't shrug." "You didn't fight either." "I said no. Not loud enough." She tossed the rag onto the bench, walked past him to the door. Before she stepped out, she turned. "You either mean it," she said, "or you don't." Then she was gone. Malcolm stood there a moment longer, the hoop still warm from her hands. The card sat on the table all afternoon. Campbell Byers, Echelon Spirits, thin font. No title, just a phone number and a quiet kind of confidence. Malcolm tore it once, then again, then again. The pieces went into the stove without ceremony. He didn't light the fire, just left them there. The barn was colder that night, the kind of cold that lived in the wood. He pulled the tarp from the far wall, started sweeping, not like someone passing time, but like someone trying to find something under the dust. It took an hour before he found the trap door. He remembered it, vaguely. A space Gregor used when suppliers were late or customs was too eager. He'd thought it was long sealed. The hinges groaned, but the wood held, a single step down, then another. He lit a lantern. The flame danced against the low stone ceiling. The air smelled of mildew, wet oak, and something older. Boxes, staves, an old copper funnel. 2 sealed bottles in straw, their labels half-eaten by time. And 1 crate tucked into the corner, low to the ground, the lid warped from damp. On the top, faded black paint, for after. His breath caught slightly. He set the lantern down, brushed the mold from the wood. The lid opened with a pop of rusted nail. Inside, cloth-wrapped bundles, a stack of papers bound with twine, and under that, a folded page in wax paper, single sheet, creased neatly down the middle. The ink was faded, but the handwriting was unmistakable. The wax paper crinkled like leaves in his hand. Malcolm unfolded it slowly, careful not to tear the creases. The paper inside had yellowed, the ink thinned in places, but the writing held. At the top, in Gregor's steady hand, "To the next fool who tries." Below that, a few lines, no more. If you're reading this, you've either run out of money or grown enough pride to think you won't. Either way, welcome. There's no secret. You wait, you work, you lose a few friends. You pour your best into the dirt. You keep going. If they offer you a story, tell them you've already lived it. No signature. Malcolm stood there a while in the cellar's damp stillness, the paper open in his hands. The lantern hissed softly behind him. He folded the letter back the way it had been, slid it into the inside pocket of his coat. When he climbed the steps back into the barn, he didn't look around. Didn't need to. At the kitchen table, he opened his notebook, turned to a blank page. At the top, he wrote label. Then, underneath it, in clear, slow print, "If they offer you a story, tell them you've already lived it." He closed the book, poured a small dram, didn't drink it right away. The barn smelled different now, not newer, not better, just fuller. 3 barrels sat in the cool dark, lined along the far wall, spaced just enough to breathe. The first one had lost a bit of volume. The angels' share, they called it. Malcolm didn't complain. Angels paid their due same as men. He swept the floor every other day, not for visitors, there weren't any, but to keep the shape of the place. Dust drifted in no matter what, from the rafters, from the sea, from time. He oiled the hinges on the copper still, polished the sight glass, checked the seal even when he had no plans to run it. Routine kept things honest. A rusted calendar hung by the door, one of those giveaways from the feed shop. The pages never got turned. Across the blank month at the top, in ink that had faded with the light, he'd written a single word. Maybe. At some point he'd crossed it out. There were no other marks, no dates circled, no delivery expected, just barrels, just days, just waiting. He logged the temperature every morning, humidity at midday. Nothing changed much. That was the work. He drank less now, not out of caution, just because he didn't need to. The whiskey was sleeping, and sleep, once earned, should not be disturbed. The kettle got more use than the still. Some afternoons, Malcolm would hear the crunch of boots on gravel and know, without checking who it was by the rhythm. Ewan came often. Never knocked. Just stood in the doorway and let the smell of wood and copper remind him of the old days. Sometimes he brought bread. Once, a raincoat. Always left something behind. He never asked how the whiskey was coming. A young couple from the town, she a teacher, he something with boats, came one morning to ask if they could photograph the barn. Said it looked honest. Malcolm said nothing. They stayed an hour and took no photos, left with their hands in their coat pockets. Then there was the Coast Guard, retired. Name might have been Dougie, or Donald. He had theories about barrel strength, about sea air, about how Campbeltown used to mean something. You know, he said, leaning over a mug of tea, the casks breathe different when the gulls nest close to the roof. Malcolm hadn't replied. Didn't need to. None of them asked for whiskey. Not really. They asked other things. Stones holding up? You seal that east wall yet? You get salt coming in through the floorboards? But they stayed too long for small talk, and left without finishing their tea, as if they were checking on something fragile, not quite ready to name it, not quite ready to believe in it. He heard the wheel before he saw her. A hollow thud-thud, steady and slow. Then a pause. Then the roll again. Ainsley came into view around the corner of the barn, sleeves rolled, jaw set, one hand on the rim of a short new cask. The wood was dark and still warm. Fresh char, blackened crisp, the iron hoops clean with sweat and effort. She didn't say anything when she reached the door, just nudged it open with her boot, rolled the barrel inside, and positioned it beside the others. The third one, the youngest. Then she stepped back, wiped her hands on her hips. Malcolm stood by the workbench. She didn't meet his eyes. "This one's yours," she said. He nodded once. "Looks solid." "It is. If it leaks, it's on you." "Then I'll learn wet." That made her look at him finally. No smile, but something passed behind her eyes. She walked to the bench, picked up the chalk, wrote on the head of the barrel in a rough, quick hand. "Struan, number 4. Then under it, don't rush." She set the chalk down. "I'll need it back in 20 years, she said. "For what?" "Furniture." He almost smiled. "Reckon I'll still be here." "Reckon you will." Then she turned, paused at the door. "You feeding the gulls again?" she asked, half over her shoulder. "They feed themselves." She nodded. "Same as casks." Then left. The tide was out. He walked the beach where the sea peeled back the shore like old cloth. Pebbles, kelp, bits of driftwood scattered in soft patterns made by nothing in particular. The light had that late-hour blue, not night, not day. The gulls were quiet. Even the wind had run out of things to say. Malcolm walked slow, let the sand take his weight, let the water darken the edges of his boots. He didn't think of barrels, not directly, but every shape out there reminded him of one. Rounded stones, washed-up staves from some ruined boat, the ring of salt around a tide pool. He picked up a bit of driftwood, turned it over in his hand. Smooth, pale, useless, and beautiful because of it. When he got home, he didn't go to the barn. He went to the kitchen, sat at the table, lit the lamp. Gregor's journal sat at the far edge, closed. Malcolm opened it, turned to a blank page near the back. No dates, just lined paper. And he wrote, "No new cuts, no change in the grain. Cask 3 is still holding. Cask 4 arrived today. Char still breathing." He paused, then continued. "I don't know if you meant for me to read this, or just to find it, but I've started writing in your margins. Don't mind. I'll keep it neat. There's something in this silence that's louder than the old world, and something in the waiting that feels more honest than the making." At the bottom of the page he wrote, "This is the cost of doing it right. You wait, you pour. You hope someone's still there when it's ready." He closed the book, left it open. The house didn't feel still. Sleep wouldn't come. The kind of night where the sheets never sit right and the walls make old sounds, expanding, settling, remembering. So he rose, pulled on his jumper, lit no lamp. The moon did enough. The walk to the barn was short, but he took it slow. Gravel beneath his boots, damp grass brushing his cuffs. No wind tonight, no sound but his steps. He opened the barn door without haste. The hinges, newly oiled, didn't complain. Moonlight poured through the high windows, pale and patient. The still gleamed in the shadows like a monument that didn't ask to be seen. He stepped to the first cask. Number 1. The one that had almost offended him, the one that now made him proud in a way he wouldn't say aloud. He laid his hand on the top. The wood was warm, not from heat, from life. Casks breathed, that was a fact. The oak inhaled in the day and exhaled at night, took in the air, let the spirit shift, changed with the temperature, lived on nothing but time and touch. He closed his eyes. He could feel it, subtle, quiet, the thrum beneath his fingers. Not movement, not sound, but presence. He stayed there for a long time, not thinking, not deciding, just breathing with it. He didn't sleep the night before, not out of nerves, not exactly. There was no ceremony in him, no grand expectation, just a kind of pressure behind the ribs, a heaviness that made the house too quiet to sit still in. By morning, he'd already been in the barn an hour. The light came in slow, silver through the high panes. He walked to the far wall where the barrels sat, 4 of them now, the first showing age in its color, the hoops darkening, the wood faintly weeping where the seasons had stretched it. Above the first cask, on the beam, there was still the word, "Maybe," crossed out in ink years ago. Beside it, clean wood, untouched, waiting. He took the carpenter's pencil from his pocket, scored it lightly across the beam. 3 years. Then the date. The graphite looked pale against the pine. It didn't need to be bold, just honest. He set the pencil down, didn't touch the barrel, and didn't speak, didn't pour. He just stood beside it a while, breathing in the air. Wood, sea, copper. The moment didn't feel like a beginning. It felt like something holding its breath. He brought the glasses from the house wrapped in a clean dish towel, not Glencairns, not nosing tulips, just 2 small tumblers, mismatched. The kind that had held tea once, and gin on a warm night, and maybe a dram poured without thought after long days. He set them down on the workbench. One wobbled slightly on its base. He adjusted it, took a rag from the nail above the sink, wiped them both until they caught the light. Then he filled one with water from the pitcher and held it to the window. Watched the way the morning light bent through the ripples. He didn't feel proud, didn't feel afraid, just pressed. The way a man feels when he's about to open something he's waited too long to know. A letter, a door, a silence that's lasted more than it should. He poured the water out, dried the glass again, set them side by side. He stood behind the workbench looking at the barrels, then the glasses, then the floor. And he waited, not for the whiskey, for someone to drink it with. The door creaked open just past noon. No knock, no call, just the sound of boots on the barn floor and the familiar scrape of the latch. Ainsley stepped inside like she had the right, which by now she did. Hair pulled back, jacket open, no bundle in her arms, no flask, no barrel this time. She looked at him, then at the cask, then the glasses. "So," she said. Malcolm exhaled through his nose. Not a laugh, not a sigh, just breath leaving the body. "We'll find out." She took a few steps in, nodded once. "Let's." No smile, no joke. Just the sound of wind through the high slats and the weight of what 3 years can mean when they're wrapped in wood and waiting. She moved to the workbench, stood across from him, hands resting lightly on the edge, the glasses between them, empty, clean, cold to the touch. Malcolm reached for the cask. The bung came out easy. He'd replaced it once already. Softer wood, better fit. And the seal held well. When he eased it free, the scent drifted up like a breath exhaled after years of holding back. Ainsley didn't lean in. She watched him. Let him move. He used the Valinche, long and curved like a question. lowered it slow into the cask, tilted, drew. No haste, no theater. The whiskey slid into the glass with a quiet, steady stream. No splash, no fuss. It caught the light, rich gold, not deep enough to boast, not pale enough to disappoint. Clean, clear. He handed her one, took the other. They didn't clink glasses, didn't toast. They just stood there in that soft barn light and raised them to their noses. It opened slow. First, smoke, but not the harsh kind. More like burnt heather or wool near the fire. Then a trace of salt. Maybe brine. Maybe sea air trapped in the oak. Then something green, not fresh. Faint. A memory of something growing. They drank, small sip, letting it move, letting it say what it could. Malcolm swallowed, felt it land low in his chest. It wasn't perfect. He didn't expect it to be. But it was true. Ainsley drank slower, let the glass linger before she set it down. Then she looked at him. "That's real," she said. "Nothing more, and nothing else needed." They didn't speak much after. The glasses sat empty on the bench. Neither of them reached to refill them. The first pour was the one that mattered. Everything after that would be for others. The wind shifted outside, a low moan through the cracks in the barn's far wall, the sound of sea air testing old wood. Malcolm leaned back against the workbench, arms crossed, staring at the barrel. Ainsley sat on an overturned crate, one boot propped against the leg. The lamplight caught the edge of her jaw, a little dust smudged above one brow from the cask's char. She looked tired, but not worn, the kind of tired that comes after something good. Minutes passed like that. Then, without looking at him, she asked, "You have a name for it?" He didn't answer right away. He thought of the pages in the journal, of the bottle in the floorboards, of the line Gregor had written, and the voice that came with it. Then he said, simply, "Struan." No fanfare, no explanation, just the name. She didn't ask again, didn't question it. She stood, brushed off her hands, walked to the door. At the threshold she turned, the faintest smile, not full, not soft, just there. "Struan," she repeated, and nodded like it had always been called that. Then she was gone. Malcolm stayed, not to savor, not to reflect, just to be near it. The cask breathing slow beside him, and the silence full of something earned. The first sale didn't happen in a shop. It happened in the back room of Ewan's shed, behind 2 bags of malt and a tractor tire, with the faint smell of diesel in the air. Ewan handed him a folded envelope. Inside were 2 20s, some coins, and a list in pencil. 2 Struan bottles. Rory, paid. Wants more if you've got it. At the bottom, written almost as an afterthought, "Left you a sack of Arran tatties. Behind the shed." Malcolm didn't smile, but the paper stayed in his hand for a long moment. He tucked it into his coat. The bottles had gone out quietly. No labels yet, just plain glass, a wax seal, and a small tag handwritten by Ainsley that said simply, "Struan, Cask 1, Bottle 6 of 30. He didn't know where Bottle 6 had gone. He didn't care. He went back to the barn and opened the small ledger he'd started with his neatest handwriting. Sales, Rory, 2 bottles, 41 pounds 75 pence plus 1 sack potatoes. That was it. No receipt, no taxes, no branding. But it was real. He poured himself a dram, not to celebrate but to understand. Held it to the light. Let it catch the barn's warmth. Took 1 sip, not the first, not the last, just one. And for the first time he didn't taste only Gregor. He tasted something new. The day was overcast and the light in the barn was the color of old linen. Malcolm stood over the mash tun, elbow deep in barley, when the door scraped open and Ainsley stepped inside. She didn't speak. She just set her gloves down on the bench, pulled her hair back with a band from her wrist, and said, "You got heat in that boiler or not?" He gestured with his chin. "Already on." "Good. No sense standing around letting it feel sorry for itself." They worked like that, without explanation, without discussion. She knew what needed doing, and so did he. The new cask sat ready in the far corner, staves still pale from charring, hoops loose but waiting. She handled the steaming, bent over the cask with a coil of hose, eyes squinting in the heat. Malcolm monitored the spirit run, taking readings, adjusting the flame beneath the still with careful, deliberate turns. Now and then they spoke, but it was all task. Top stave needs a tap. Got it. You're leaning it too far to the left. Looks fine from this side. Once their hands met briefly over the copper dog. Neither of them commented. There was a rhythm now, not romantic, not dramatic. Just a quiet sinking of two people who had spent enough time alone with their work to know how to move without noise. As she rolled the finished cask across the floor, she said, "If you're filling this one today, I'd hold back the second cut." Malcolm nodded. "It's too sweet. Not enough smoke. Not enough truth." She looked up at him then, that small grin again, the one that didn't show teeth but showed knowing. They didn't toast, they didn't touch, they just worked. And it felt like something important, not starting, not ending, but continuing. Evening came late that day, the way it does when the weather holds still and the sea forgets to change its mind. They stood side by side at the workbench, sleeves rolled, fingers stained with wax and ink. 12 bottles lined up in a crooked row, each filled by hand. Malcolm checked each one against the mark scratched into the neck. No fancy gauges, just the eye and a steady pour. "Too much," Ainsley said, pointing at the 8th. He squinted. "Just right." "You'll swell the cork." "I like a generous measure." "You like problems." She handed him a new cork. He took it without argument. They sealed them in silence. She used a block of black wax she'd warmed over the stove, melted it into a tin cup, turned each bottle slowly to coat the neck. The smell of it rose between them. Smoke, resin, warmth. Malcolm affixed the tags. Just twine and rough paper. No branding, no story. Just the name Struan Cask 1. Bottle 11 of 30. It felt like they were building something that didn't want to be rushed. By the time they finished, the barn was full of shadows, and the warmth from the still had settled into the stone floor. Ainsley poured them tea, not whiskey. Tea. From an old enamel kettle she'd brought months ago and forgotten to take back. They sat on overturned crates, shoulder to shoulder, but not quite touching. "Cork's still a little proud," she said, nodding toward bottle 12. Malcolm sipped his tea. "It'll swell." She looked sideways at him. The corner of her mouth tugged up. They drank without speaking for a while. Something unspoken hung between them now. Not heat, exactly. Not yet. But the kind of quiet that only settles between two people who've built something together. Bottle by bottle, word by word. It was the 11th bottle, the one Ainsley said was overfilled. Ewan passed it along without saying much. Just slid it across the table to a retired publican from Kintyre who used to run a bar called the Sea Glass until his knees gave out. The man took it home, poured 2 glasses with an old friend who now wrote tasting notes online and called himself the Quiet Malt. No one thought anything of it. 3 days later, a photo appeared. Rough bottle, black wax, handwritten tag. No label, no backstory, just one sentence underneath. Struan. Campbeltown tastes like wind and fire. The site wasn't famous, but it had reach. Malcolm didn't notice right away. He didn't check those things. But Ewan came round with a printed email from someone in Stirling, asking to reserve a few bottles or a cask or whatever's left. Malcolm read it once, set it aside. 2 days later, another message came, then another. He didn't answer. He didn't distrust the interest, and he just didn't know what to do with it. "I think you've got something," Ewan said. "Not just flavor, meaning." "I've got 4 casks," Malcolm replied. Meaning doesn't stretch far. But even as he said it, something inside him stirred. Not ambition, not pride, just the old ache that comes when something you've built gets seen. Not praised, just seen. That night he sat at the table and reread the sentence under the photo. Tastes like wind and fire. He didn't know if it was right, but it wasn't wrong. She didn't knock. She never did now. Just stepped into the barn with a box under one arm and a thermos of tea in the other. The same tea as before. "Thought you'd be here," she said. "Where else would I be?" She said nothing to that, just set the box down on the workbench and pulled the lid off slow. Inside was a piece of old roofing slate, dark and matte, cut to a clean square. She turned it toward him, etched into the stone with soft white chalk. A sketch of the barn's roofline, crooked, wind-battered, unmistakably itself. Below it, in her careful hand, Struan, not stylized, not clever, just written. "It's not a logo," she said. "It's a reminder." "Of what?" "Where it came from." He looked at it a long time, said nothing. Then he lifted it out of the box and walked it across the barn. Held it up to the wall above cask 1. Nailed it there with 2 iron tacks, 1 in each corner. When he stepped back, she was beside him. Not touching, just close. They looked at it together. The sketch, the name, the casks below. Then she poured tea. They drank it in silence. And the silence, like the label, was simple. Unnamed, but full. They were sitting outside the barn, legs stretched toward the morning light, mugs of tea cooling in their hands. The sky over Campbeltown Bay was that muted gray blue, the kind that meant no rain yet, but plenty coming. Malcolm had been watching her hands, not directly, just the way they curled around the mug, the calluses along the knuckles, the half-moon scar on her thumb that caught the light when she tipped the cup. "Ever think about teaching someone else the craft?" he asked. Ainsley didn't turn her head. "You volunteering?" "More or less." She took a sip, let the silence stretch long enough that he wasn't sure if she'd answer. Then, "It's harder than it looks. So's whiskey." "Whiskey forgives you eventually." He looked sideways at her. "Barrels don't." She shook her head. "Barrels remember every mistake." He liked that, didn't say so. Instead, he asked, "If I were to build one, just one, think it'd hold?" That made her turn. She studied his face for a long moment, then his hands, then the barn door behind him. "Come by tomorrow," she said. "Dawn. Bring gloves. Leave your pride at home. I don't carry much of it anyway." She stood, finished her tea in one gulp, and walked toward the road. Without looking back, she said over her shoulder, "Good. You'll need both hands free." The cooperage smelled of wet oak and ash. Dawn hadn't quite broken. The light came sideways through the high windows, gray and reluctant. Steam hung low from the first fire of the day, curling up from the cauldron she'd set to boil. Ainsley stood over a rack of staves, selecting them the way someone chooses words. Careful, unhurried, not interested in shortcuts. "You ever split a thumb open with dry wood?" she asked without looking up. "Can't say I have." "Keep your gloves on, then." She handed him 5 staves. "First lesson, wood's like people. You rush it, it won't bend." Malcolm turned one over in his hands. The grain was fine, tight. It smelled faintly sweet. "Look straight." "Too straight," she said. "It'll fight you." "You'll see." They steamed them over the fire while she sharpened her draw knife. He tried to copy her movements, steady strokes, shallow pulls, but his cuts were uneven, hesitant. "Try less thinking," she said, watching. "More trusting." "Trust the blade?" "Trust the wood," he snorted. "So we're already spiritual about it." She didn't laugh. "We've always been. You just came late to it." The staves came out soft from the steam, pliable, but only for a window. She handed him the hooping hammer and stepped back. He crouched over the form, positioned the first 4 staves into the raising ring. The 5th slid out twice before he got it to hold. The 6th fell forward and knocked the rest apart. He swore. "Go ahead," she said. "Blame the wood." I'll blame the teacher. You wouldn't be the first. He tried again, sweat starting along his brow, breath tighter than he liked to admit. His hands weren't made for this, not anymore. They'd gone soft over years of paperwork and travel. These days they turned pages, not iron. Harder than it looks, he muttered. Told you, she said. Barrels remember. The second hoop was stubborn. It always was, she'd warned him. Getting it down the staves required rhythm, not strength. You had to guide it, not force it. Malcolm didn't listen, not fully. He took the hammer, positioned the hoop with care, then struck. Too hard, too fast. The stave on the left shifted. The ring caught its edge and kicked sideways. The hammer slipped from his grip and his knuckles cracked hard against the iron rim. He swore under his breath and stood upright, cradling his hand. Let me see, Ainsley said. I'm fine. She ignored that, crossed to him, took his wrist gently but firmly, turned it. The skin was already purpling across the knuckles. Didn't break it, she said, but you'll feel it tomorrow. Her fingers were calloused, sure. She moved his hand like it was something she knew well, something she could fix. He stood still while she examined it, watching the curve of her brow, the faint freckle on her cheekbone, the strand of hair loose from behind her ear. She looked up, found him watching. Their faces were closer than they'd been. Neither stepped back. You trying to impress me? She said. Is it working? She let go of his wrist. No, he smiled. Not even a little? Still nothing. Then, as she turned back toward the barrel, maybe just for trying. But she set it low, like it wasn't meant to carry, and she didn't look back. The barrel stood upright now, rough, imperfect, but whole. It wasn't square exactly. The hoops wobbled slightly, and one of the staves had a shallow nick from where the hammer slipped. But it held. They wheeled it over to the charring pit, a shallow iron basin built into the floor, ringed with soot. Malcolm knelt first, striking the match, lighting the rag tucked beneath the kindling. Smoke bloomed fast. Ainsley lowered the cask over the flame, slow and careful, letting the fire catch inside. Then they stood, shoulder to shoulder, watching it burn. The inside flared with orange, flickering light licking the wood, curling smoke through the gaps. She turned the barrel in increments, a quarter roll, then pause. The same rhythm she'd used for years, muscle memory guided by scent, not time. Neither of them spoke. The room darkened around the flame, the firelight painting her face in sharp edges. Her eyes focused, her mouth set. Malcolm didn't try to talk. He wouldn't have known what to say. The sweat along his brow wasn't just from heat. It was the closeness, the quiet, the knowledge that whatever this was, it was something. The fire began to die down. She tilted the cask back, let the smoke drift out, tapped the rim with her knuckle. Hot enough, she said. He handed her the chalk. Didn't speak. She didn't ask what to write. She just knelt and wrote one word across the base. M. Then added a line below it. A date. Today. She looked up. It's yours. For better or worse. They rolled the cask into the corner near the others. It thumped gently against the stones, settled into the earth like it belonged there. It didn't look like hers. It was crooked in the middle, and the hoops were uneven. The staves didn't line up like soldiers, but leaned slightly where his cuts had wandered. Still, it held. Ainsley stepped back and looked it over, quietly. Then she crouched, ran her palm over the seam where the wood met wood, tapped it with her knuckle. Not bad, she said. Malcolm stood beside her, watching her check it, not saying anything. She pressed her fingers against the head of the cask. Still needs time to swell. He nodded. Everything worth doing takes time. She rose to her feet, brushed her hands off, then rested one lightly on the top of the cask. They stood beside it, neither in a rush to move. The late light had gone gold, angling through the cooperage windows. She looked over at him, eyes steady, no smile. But there was something in the way she stayed, not waiting, not weighing anything, just being there. After a moment, she said, "You'll want to mark it. Before you forget it's yours." He stepped to the workbench and picked up the chalk. Wrote one word on the head. Malcolm, nothing else. When he looked back, she was already pulling the doors open to let the last of the daylight in. But before she stepped outside, she said, "It'll hold." He wasn't sure if she meant the cask, or the work, or something else. He didn't ask. The door let in a gust of salt wind when he opened it. Inside, the Gull and Thistle was low lit, worn around the edges, and warmer than he remembered. The kind of warmth that came from damp coats near the fire, and too many bodies in a small room. He hadn't stepped in alone since he'd returned. Not really. Once briefly, months ago. Long enough to pick up a takeaway and leave before his name got noticed. But this time, he didn't hurry. He stepped to the bar. Ian was working the taps. A man with a wide nose and permanent stubble. He'd once driven lorries up to Inverness and back. Now he kept the beer flowing, and the peace kept. Malcolm didn't ask for anything special, just said, "Pint, please." Ian gave him a look, not unfriendly, just measuring, then nodded and pulled it smooth. Malcolm paid in cash, took his glass. He didn't scan the room. That would have made it feel like he needed something. Instead, he walked to the window table, a small round one with a deep scratch across the middle, the varnish flaked away. He sat with his back to the wall. Outside, the street was slick from a late rain. Inside, the voices folded over each other like old sweaters. Dominoes clicked in one corner. Someone cursed under their breath at a quiz show on the telly. No one called his name. No one ignored him either. He was just there, part of the room, and that was enough. He was halfway through his pint when the door opened again. A gust of wind came with it, and then Ewan, shaking water off his cap and muttering something about the road out to Southend being half sea now. He spotted Malcolm and made for the table. "You're earlier than I thought," he said, sitting without asking. "Or I'm later." "You're later," Malcolm said. Ewan grinned and waved at Ian for a pint. He sat down with the ease of a man who's known the chair longer than most people in the room. "You met the fellas?" he asked, nodding toward the next table. Two men were hunched over a game of dominoes, the board between them like a battleground of white bone and black dots. One wore a tweed flat cap that hadn't changed shape in 20 years. The other had a thick mustache and a mouth that didn't much like closing. "Hugh," Ewan said, pointing at the mustache, "and that's Callum. Don't play either of them for money." The men looked over and gave Malcolm a nod each. That was all. "And this," Ewan said, turning slightly, "is Fiona. She works the Ferry Manifest, knows who's coming and going before they do." The woman beside the stove gave a small smile. She was in her 50s maybe, hair tied up in a bun that looked like it stayed there all week. "Struan," she said. Not as a question. Malcolm hesitated, then nodded. "Fiona hears everything," Ewan said. "I read the manifests," she said, "and I listen." There was no judgment in it, no curiosity either. Just a quiet kind of knowing. They didn't ask for a story. They didn't offer one either. Names were enough. That's how it started. The conversation drifted between the tables like smoke, weather, roads, someone's cousin buying a sheepdog that was all bark and no brains. Ewan's pint came. Callum made a comment about the cost of barley going up, and Malcolm gave a quiet nod, not wanting to say too much. Still learning which opinions mattered in a room like this. Then, from the far side of the room, a shape stirred. Old Dougal, late 60s, maybe older. No one was sure where he lived exactly, but he was always at the Thistle by dusk and gone again by closing. He stood, reached into his coat pocket and walked over with something tucked under his arm. He didn't speak as he placed it on the table. A bottle, no label, black wax. Twine still tied. One of Malcolm's. Dougal looked down at it like it had just fallen out of the sky. Thought we'd see if it held up, he said. Ewan smirked. Where'd you get that? Woman at the ferry office had it. Fiona didn't look up from her knitting. It was a gift. I regifted. Malcolm glanced at the seal. It was one of the early 30s. Bottle 10, if the chalk mark on the bottom was still legible. Ewan uncorked it. No toast, no build-up. He poured 4 small measures into the pub's chipped whiskey glasses, thick-bottomed utilitarian things that didn't care for ceremony. The room didn't go quiet, but the table did. They each took a sip. Hugh grunted once and wiped his mustache. Not bad. Callum gave a slow nod. Fiona held hers longer, nose just above the rim, then drank. Better than the stuff they bottle for tourists. That was all. But it settled over the table like something real. Malcolm didn't speak. He just sat with his hands around the glass, the smell rising warm into his throat, and let it be what it was. Malcolm finished his glass and set it down with a quiet thud. He didn't need more. The one was enough. The others kept sipping, slow. No one reached for a second. That wasn't how it worked. Not here. He stood and went to the bar. Ian looked up. Another? Malcolm shook his head. Round, just the usual. For them lot. He nodded toward the tables. Hugh, Callum, Fiona, Dougal, Ewan. A handful of others tucked along the back wall. Ian gave him a long look. Not surprised, just marking it. Then started pulling pints. Malcolm didn't say anything when the glasses were handed out. He just returned to his seat. Let the drinks speak for him. There was no toast, no clapping of backs, just the quiet shift in how the room sat. Callum lifted his glass slightly. Hugh gave a grunt that passed for thanks. Fiona looked at him with a smile just behind her eyes. Dougal leaned forward, eyes on the glass, and said, Struan's welcome here, I'd say. Malcolm didn't reply, just nodded once. A minute later, a stool scraped beside him. Someone sat, a man in a work jacket, face vaguely familiar. Might have been on the ferry crew, or the warehouse near the marina. Your cask's the one Ainsley helped with, the man asked. Malcolm said, she helped with most of it. They started to talk, about barrels, then boats, then weather. It wasn't friendship, not yet. But it was something. A space was being made, and he was in it. The fire had burned low, and the bar's voices had thinned into smaller conversations, scattered like driftwood in the tide. Malcolm checked the clock behind the bar. Late enough. He stood and pulled on his coat, the wool still damp near the shoulders from the walk-in. Ewan gave a quiet aye, and tipped his glass. Callum didn't look up, still arranging dominoes. Malcolm stepped toward the door, hand on the old brass handle. Then, from her spot near the stove, Fiona said, Don't be a stranger, Struan. It wasn't shouted, wasn't warm, just said like a fact. Like the way you might remind someone not to forget their keys. He paused a second longer than he meant to. Didn't correct her. Didn't say it wasn't his name. Because maybe now it was. He turned back just enough to nod, then pushed open the door and stepped out into the night. The air was sharp, sea-salted. The street was quiet. He pulled his coat tighter and walked toward home. Slow, no rush. The weight in his chest wasn't heavy exactly, just full. He found it on the 4th read-through. Gregor's handwriting had tightened in the later pages, the loops narrower, the lines slanted to the right, like the sentences were leaning into something he didn't want to say aloud. One entry read, Tried again with the water from the burn above Cross Hill. Light, fast, sharp, something in it like wind in nettles. No weight, but there's a brightness I can't stop thinking about. Malcolm set the book down and looked out the barn window toward the hills. The burn wasn't far, an hour's walk maybe, up past the old sheep fence and through the line of rowan trees. He packed 2 glass jugs in a rucksack and didn't tell Ainsley where he was going. The trail was muddy in places, half swallowed by bramble. He found the burn by sound before sight, that fast light trickling, like someone whispering just out of reach. It wasn't wide, maybe 2 feet across, shallow and cold. The stones at the bottom were mottled green and rust. He crouched, dipped his hands in. It felt clean, alive. He filled both jugs, corked them tight, and started back with the weight shifting on his back and something like anticipation in his chest. When he reached the barn, Ainsley was leaning against the side wall, coat half buttoned, mug in hand. She raised an eyebrow when she saw the jugs. Planning a bath? Water run. You're nowhere near out. He stepped past her without answering, set the jugs on the bench. She didn't press, but he knew she'd be there when he ran it. The water changed everything. From the first boil, the smell lifted higher. Less depth, maybe, but more movement. There was something almost grassy in it, not fresh cut, but wind-blown. Malcolm watched the vapors coil, faster than usual. The still seemed to breathe differently. It ran hot. He adjusted the flame twice, checked the spirit safe, and took his notes by hand, though most of what he was marking down wasn't something a number could hold. The middle cut didn't feel right. It was clean, yes, but thin in places. The flavor didn't settle. Every third dram felt like a different whiskey. He still bottled a test pull from the heart of it, a narrow window. Only 1 bottle's worth. He was watching it settle when the door opened. Ainsley stepped in, gloves tucked into her coat pocket, sleeves rolled. She looked around, then at the bottle. "You used it," she said. He nodded once. She walked over, bent to smell the safe. "Smells green," she said. "Not bad." He didn't answer. She crossed her arms. "What are you hoping for?" He set the cork into the test bottle without looking at her. "Something Gregor couldn't finish." She didn't comment. Didn't need to. Instead, she stepped to the still, felt the pipe with the back of her hand, then turned the flame down a fraction. It hissed slightly in response. She stayed, silent by the window while the last of the run trickled through. He didn't know what she was thinking, but he knew what he hoped she'd say, and also that she probably wouldn't. Not yet. They tasted it in silence. The dram sat between them on the bench, poured into 2 mismatched glasses. The light was flat from the overcast sky outside, the kind that makes everything in a barn feel quiet. Even voices. Malcolm took his sip first. Then Ainsley. She didn't speak right away, just let it settle. Rolled the whiskey once between her palms like she was checking its weight. "Well?" he asked. She tilted her head. "It's interesting," he frowned. That's a word people use when they hate something but don't want to argue about it. I don't hate it, but it's not finished. He leaned back slightly. It's clean. Has character. It's not bad, Malcolm. It's just not balanced. You've got too much brightness, not enough depth. It feels like 3 whiskeys trying to be one. He took another sip. I want it to stand on its own. That's the point. Even whiskey that stands on its own sometimes leans a bit, she said. It wouldn't be a crime to blend it. Pull a little from batch 3. Add weight. He shook his head. Then it's not the Burnwater batch anymore. No, she said, voice calm. Then it's something better. He looked away toward the row of barrels. You think I'm chasing ghosts, he said. She was quiet a moment. I think you're trying to answer a man who's not here to reply. That hit closer than he liked. He set his glass down. I'm not trying to be Gregor. I know, she said, but you're still arguing with him. They sat in the stillness of that. It wasn't anger between them. Not quite. Just the space that forms when 2 people see the same thing and want something slightly different from it. Malcolm stood, not abruptly, just enough to step away from the bench. He left the dram sitting where it was, the half-sipped pour catching a slice of gray light through the bottle. He didn't say anything. Didn't leave the room either. He moved to the casks and ran his hand along the top of one, the second from the left, where batch 3 rested. Ainsley stayed where she was. She didn't offer another opinion, didn't fill the silence with advice or correction. She just picked up a cloth and began wiping down the tools, cleaned the lip of the copper dog, stacked the tasting glasses upside down near the sink. It was a quiet rhythm, the sound of someone staying without demanding to be noticed. After a while, Malcolm returned to the bench. No fanfare, no explanation. He uncorked the test bottle again, pulled a small sample from batch 3, just a few drops, tipped them in with care, swirled, watched the liquid shift, tasted, didn't speak. Then he set the glass down between them. She looked at it, waited a second, then picked it up and sipped. She didn't smile, didn't nod too quickly, just set it down slowly. "Better," she said. He didn't answer, but his shoulders just slightly relaxed. They bottled it quietly. Not much, maybe 5 liters all told. A few small cask-strength bottles corked and sealed. No wax yet. Malcolm wrote the date in chalk on each bottle's shoulder. Just that 15th of March. No name, no batch number, just the day it happened. Ainsley stood near the rack, watching him write. Her hands were in her coat pockets. The barn was quiet again, save for the soft sound of chalk against glass. "You going to name it?" she asked. He kept writing. "Not this one. Not yet." She gave a faint nod. Didn't press. He stacked the bottles on the shelf beside the other experiments. None of them would go out to shops. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But they were real. And this one, for all its strangeness, had earned its place among them. She moved to the door and paused there. The barn light caught the edge of her face. She didn't speak. Just looked back at him. Not appraising, not questioning. Then, as she turned to go, she reached out and touched his arm. Just once, not for long, but she held it and then let go. The door swung open, wind moved through the rafters, and she was gone. The emails had been sitting in his inbox for 3 days. 2 were from a craft distributor based in Edinburgh. One subject line read simply, Campbeltown bottle. Very promising. The third was from a whiskey bar in Finnieston. They'd gotten their hands on one of the early black wax bottles and wanted 6 more, of whatever's next. Peated, unpeated, doesn't matter. Malcolm read them again over tea at the barn workbench. He didn't reply. Not because he wasn't interested, but because he didn't know what to say. He didn't have 6 bottles to sell, let alone 6 cases. He heard her boots before he saw her. That familiar scrape of heel on stone as Ainsley crossed the threshold, scarf half-wrapped, hair wind-blown. "Something wrong with your face," she said. He handed her the laptop. "Read the top 3. She skimmed. Said nothing for a long while, then, Well. Problem is, I've got nothing to give them." "You've got whiskey." "I've got 4 aging casks, 1 experimental batch, and a barn with a cold floor." She handed the laptop back. "You've also got attention, which is more than most distillers get before their 3rd tax return." He set it down and rubbed his jaw. "I didn't mean for it to happen this fast." "No one does," she said. "Doesn't mean it's not real." She looked at him. "You going to answer them?" He hesitated. "Not until I know what I can promise." She gave a small shrug. "Well, if you don't, I might." He looked up. She was smiling, not wide, but real, a little too knowing. He narrowed his eyes. "You didn't send a bottle to that blogger, did you?" "No," she said, "but I might have handed it to someone who did." They sat across from one another at the barn table, mugs gone cold beside them, a notebook open between them with a line drawn down the middle. Ainsley wrote as she talked. Her handwriting was clean, a little slanted, with numbers that looked like they'd been written on barrel heads 100 times. 4 full casks, she said. 2 of those aren't ready. One's experimental. The other is almost there. What, 8 months off? Closer to 6, maybe. Okay, say 6. She drew a line under the number. That's what, 200 bottles if you stretch the cut? 150 at best. Then add bottle cost, labels, closures, postage, and don't forget duty. He didn't argue the figures, he knew them well enough. What you've got, she said, is something people want. But if you want to keep doing this, the way you want to do it, you can't treat every bottle like a farewell letter to your grandfather. I'm not. She glanced up, waited. He added, not exactly. You're still thinking like a man with nothing to lose, she said. But you've got a name now. People are watching. If you can't meet that with something steady, they'll lose interest before you even register the trademark. I didn't start this to chase margins. No, she said. You started it because it meant something, but margins are what let you keep doing it. He rubbed his hand through his beard, leaned back. The old rafters creaked above them. I didn't expect it to get this real. Ainsley folded the notebook shut. Then you're lucky. Most of us start in the real. We have to earn the rest. The conversation stopped after that. Not with a word. Not with a walkout. Just drifted. Ainsley moved to the back corner where a hoop had split along the seam. She wedged it in the vise and started sanding the inside curve, slow and rhythmic. Malcolm sat at the bench near the still, scribbling in his ledger. Small notes about flow rates, copper temperature, the finish on batch 4, and a list of names he didn't know if he'd answer. The barn held its usual creaks and sighs. The wind outside leaned against the west wall, like it wanted in but couldn't quite manage it. Every so often he'd glance over, not long enough to draw attention, just long enough to confirm she was still there, still working. She didn't hum, didn't talk to herself, just worked with the kind of quiet that said she didn't need an audience. At some point she looked up, caught him mid-glance. They held each other's gaze for a second, not long, then both went back to their tasks. The silence stayed between them, but now it had shape, like something that might be useful if they could learn how to carry it. The sun had gone low by the time she spoke. They'd packed the tools away, cleaned the floor, and latched the big doors. He was standing near the back wall, looking at a stack of unlabeled bottles, the ones not good enough to sell, but not bad enough to throw away. She leaned against the workbench behind him, arms folded, not quite looking at him, but not looking either. I've been thinking, she said. He turned slightly. We could do it together, she said. Not just the odd bottle or borrowed space. Something real. He waited. Let her keep going. I've got casks. Tools, warehouse, you've got something that's pulling people in. We combine it. One roof, shared work, shared name maybe, or not, doesn't matter right away. He didn't speak. She added, we keep doing it the right way. No shortcuts. Just together. He looked back at the bottles. One had a crooked cork, another a slanted label. He said, and if it goes sideways? She gave a quiet laugh through her nose. Then at least we'll have someone else to blame. He turned to her now. Their eyes met across the half-lit barn. He didn't smile, but he didn't close off either. It hung there between them, the offer, the maybe. And he said nothing, but he didn't say no. The sky had cleared by the time he left the barn. Not fully. There were still clouds low over the loch, but enough to make the water catch what light was left. He walked slow, coat open, the wind soft against his collar. Past the old net sheds. Past the row of lobster creels stacked like worn-out promises along the quay. The harbor was still, the boats tied up close, their hulls knocking gently against the pilings. A few gulls circled overhead, but even they weren't in a hurry. He stopped once just to listen. There was something about this hour, after the work, before the sleep, that made everything feel less sharp, like you could hold a thought for more than a second before it slipped away. He turned up the lane that ran past her workshop. Didn't mean to, just found himself there. The door was closed, the windows dim, but there was a light on inside. Warm, low, not overhead. A lamp, probably, near her desk. He didn't knock, just stood there, hands in his pockets, watching the glow through the glass. She might have been inside writing or bottling or reading the same page twice. He didn't know. Didn't need to. It was enough that the light was on. He stayed a moment longer, then turned and walked home through the dark. She set it on the table without ceremony. A plain manila folder, the corner a little bent from being shoved into a satchel. She didn't slide it toward him, just placed it in the center of the bench, beside the empty mugs and a thin layer of sawdust. "Before you panic," she said, "it's not a contract." Malcolm raised an eyebrow. "Then what is it?" "A sketch," she said, "of something that might work." He opened it. Inside were 4 pages. 2 were hand-drawn cost outlines, inked in neat lines, with arrows and scribbled margin notes. Barrel supply estimates, shared material orders, bottling runs. The 3rd was a rough shared schedule for cask rotation and warehouse space. The last page was typed. Memorandum of Understanding. A small batch cooperation agreement between Struan Spirits and Ainsley Cooperage. There were no logos. No legal boilerplate. Just a single paragraph and 2 blank signature lines. She watched him read. "It doesn't bind you to anything," she said. "No money changes hands. We just agree to share material and space, decide together when it matters, keep it clean." He didn't speak, turned the pages again. She added, "I don't care if you sign it or not. I just wanted to see if it felt like something real." He nodded once. "It does." Then closed the folder carefully. Not like he was done with it. More like he didn't want the dust to get in. Ainsley didn't linger. "I've got to check the lower staves on batch 12, she said, brushing her hands on her coat. "Let me know what you think when you think it." Then she stepped outside, leaving the folder between them, quiet and full of possibility. He left the folder unopened on the table for the rest of the afternoon. Didn't touch it, didn't move it. Let the sunlight crawl across it inch by inch, until the shadow from the rafters fell over it completely. By dusk, he stepped outside. The lane beyond the barn was soft underfoot, that strange blend of dirt and gravel and grass that gave a little with each step. The wind was easy tonight, moving low through the trees. He walked without thinking of where. The last time he'd signed anything close to binding, it had been on thick, glossy paper at a conference table in Glasgow. 3 sets of initials, 2 witness signatures, a notary present. The deal that sold off the remainder of his shipping fleet. "Nothing personal," the solicitor had said at the time. "It's just paper. You sign it, and things move forward." But it wasn't just paper. It was 6 men laid off, 2 boats renamed, a half-empty office space where no one called anymore. He wasn't afraid of risk. He was afraid of starting something that deserved to last, and not knowing if he could keep it alive. That's what made him hesitate. Not her, not the work. Just the weight of putting your name beside someone else's and meaning it. He reached the old stone wall at the bend of the lane, stood with his hands in his coat pockets, looked out over the low hills, didn't come to a decision, but didn't turn away from it either. She came in already wearing her gloves, no greeting, no coffee. Just a tightness to the way she moved. Like every step was being measured against a clock no one else could hear. Malcolm was already at the bench, midway through cleaning the Spirit safe. He glanced up once. "You all right?" Ainsley peeled off one glove. "Robbie's out, my cooper in Oban. His wife's taken ill. Bad. And he's shutting shop for a month." Malcolm set down the brush. "Sorry to hear it. I've got a back order of 2 casks and a dozen hoops that need replacing by next week, and the kiln's got a crack in the firebox, so I can't dry the staves properly." She didn't sound panicked, just short on patience, like someone used to solving her own problems who now faced too many at once. Malcolm wiped his hands on a rag. "You need a hand?" She shot him a look. "You offering?" I've still got scrap staves from the burn batch. Some hold. We can cut around the bad parts. You show me what you need. I'll follow your lead." She hesitated, not from doubt but calculation, then nodded once. "Fine. But no free heroics. I'll pay you in stock if we end up short." Malcolm smiled faintly. "Call it interest on that memo of understanding." She didn't return the smile, not quite, but her shoulders dropped a little, and the next breath came easier. "You've got a chisel that won't betray me," she asked. "Only one that likes being handled rough." She raised an eyebrow. "That sounded filthier than you meant." He picked up the chisel and handed it over. "I'm not sure it did." By mid-afternoon, the barn smelled of scorched oak and iron filings. The kiln had just enough life in it to dry the salvaged staves. Ainsley set them in one by one, checking the fit, tapping her fingers against each edge the way a mason checks stone. Malcolm bent over the cooper's bench, hands black with charcoal and resin dust. He hadn't worked this kind of wood since helping Gregor fix a chicken coop as a boy, and that had collapsed in a stiff breeze. "Your bevel's wandering again," Ainsley said without looking up. "I know." She stepped over, took the chisel from his hand, re-angled the blade with 2 small adjustments, and handed it back. "Guide it with your thumb. Not your hopes." He gave a faint grunt, then grinned. "Did you practice being this condescending, or is it natural talent?" She smirked, brushing hair out of her eyes with the back of her wrist. "I'm a woman in whiskey. It's not condescension, it's efficiency." They worked in rhythm. One at the hooping bench, the other at the fire trough, softening iron rings for reshaping. The light outside dimmed, but neither said anything about stopping. Malcolm sanded down a crooked stave, slower this time. "You know," he said, "I've been reading up. On blending." "Oh?" "Different grain ratios. Barrel timing. How peat blends into the middle cut depending on aging humidity." She raised an eyebrow. "That's ambitious." "Just curious. Never blended anything outside of a whiskey glass." "Well," she said, fitting the last ring onto the cask with a clean thunk, "you're doing all right with barrels. Maybe blending's next." They didn't pause to let the moment swell. They just kept working. Together. They were sweeping sawdust by lantern light. The kiln had cooled, the firebox shut. 2 patched casks stood upright near the door, bound and banded like they'd never cracked at all. Malcolm folded a tarp over the workbench. The air was full of smoke and quiet satisfaction, the kind that came not from finishing something grand, but from knowing the job was done properly. Ainsley was rolling down her sleeves when he crossed the barn. He opened the drawer on the end table, took out the folder, set it on the bench between them. She didn't say anything. He flipped to the last page, picked up the pen she'd left in the fold, signed. One name. Just enough pressure to leave a light impression on the page beneath. Then he looked up at her. "It's something," he said. She didn't reach for the pen immediately, just looked at the paper, then at him. "Not what I expected," she said. "What, the signature?" "No, you." He didn't reply, so she took the pen, signed beside him, her name in quick angled strokes, confident, unadorned. The 2 names sat side by side. Not a contract, not yet a company, but a line between them now had ink on it. They were 2 days out from pickup when the call came through. Air, the printer. "We're backed up," the man said. "Lamination machine's gone down. Earliest I can get 'em to you is Monday." Malcolm glanced at the wall calendar. Pickup was Saturday. He thanked the man, hung up, and stood for a full minute staring at the blank spot on the shelf where the labels were supposed to be. Ainsley was in the back, checking bottle fills by eye. She came forward when she heard the tone in his silence. "Let me guess," she said. "Lamination machine?" He looked over. "How'd you—" She lifted a hand. "Don't ask questions you don't want the answers to. I'm not sending out unlabeled whiskey. We're not. We're sending out whiskey with temporary labels, hand-taped. We can send the fancy ones in the next shipment, or stick them on after." He shook his head. "That's not the impression I want to make." She crossed her arms. "Malcolm, if they're buying it for the label, they're not buying it for long. We're not building a brand. We're building a bottle someone talks about in a pub 3 years from now." He didn't answer. She added, "Besides, you're lucky I didn't insist we handwrite every label. I've done that. In Sharpie." He gave her a long look. "You're serious? I'm always serious. But especially when I'm right." He exhaled, not quite a laugh. "Fine, we do it your way," she grinned. "Damn right we do." They spent the next hour trimming blank craft paper into rough squares, taping them gently onto the glass with narrow strips of linen tape, each one marked by batch number, ABV, and the date. And somehow it felt more honest than the gold foil labels ever would have. The email came in that evening. Ainsley found it first, scanning the inbox while Malcolm rinsed the last of the bottling gear. She leaned over the back of the bench, laptop in hand, eyes narrowed just enough to signal it was worth reading. "You're being summoned," she said. Malcolm wiped his hands and stepped over. The subject line read, "Interest from the Keel, Glasgow." The message was brief, polite. "Hi there. Recently had a dram of the Campbeltown blend pass through a friend in Oban. Surprised us in the best way. Curious if you'd be open to a short meeting next week, ideally in the city. We're interested in 3 cases for rotation, possibly more. Would love to meet Struan. Best Alec Carver, bar manager, the Keel." Malcolm stared at the screen. Ainsley watched him watching it. "Well?" she asked. He didn't respond, and she said, "They've heard the name. They want to see who's behind it." "I don't like walking into rooms where people already have expectations," he said. She half smiled. "You mean control?" He ignored that. She closed the laptop and set it down gently. "Malcolm, if you don't show up when people are curious, they'll stop being curious. They'll fill in the blanks themselves." He looked at her. "You sound like someone who's done this before." "I have. Once badly, once not so badly." He leaned on the bench, ran a hand through his beard. "I don't have a pitch." "Good. They don't need a pitch, they want a dram and a reason to believe there's more coming." He hesitated. She added, quieter now, "You don't have to go alone." He looked at her long and even, then gave a faint nod. "Right," she said, as if that settled it. "Now we just have to decide which one of us is wearing a clean shirt." The bell above the barn door wasn't loud, but it had a way of silencing everything. Malcolm looked up from the rack he was building, just a short one, 6 rows for the bottles going out. He saw the shape of the man before the face registered. Gray coat, checked scarf, soft leather boots too clean for this part of Campbeltown. "Ain," Malcolm said. Ainsley Macrae smiled, just enough. "Didn't expect to find you out here." "Thought you might have packed it in after the sale." Malcolm set his tools down calmly. "Not quite." Ainsley took a slow step inside, looking around with the kind of professional curiosity that always felt more like appraisal. "So this is it then? The whiskey thing?" Malcolm didn't answer. Ainsley stood in the shadows near the bottling table. She didn't step forward, just listened. Ian moved slowly through the space, hands behind his back, studying casks like a man in a gallery. "I've heard things," he said lightly. "Little bar in Finnyston talking about you. Some nonsense about a burnwater blend that tastes like weather." Malcolm gave no reaction. Ian turned to him. "Tell me, you use our old client list when you started this? I only ask because a couple names have stopped returning calls." A beat of silence. Malcolm said, "I didn't take anything from the company except my name. The rest of it I earned." Ian smiled again, thin this time. Sure, just curious. Funny, that's all. You always did have charm when you wanted to." Ainsley stepped out from the shadow now, calm as a held breath. "If you're done measuring the furniture," she said, "there's work to do." Ian glanced at her, surprised, faintly amused. And you are? The reason he hasn't needed charm, she said. Ian held her gaze a second longer than he needed to, then gave a little bow, a little smirk. Well, he said, I'll leave you to it. Seems like you've got it handled. He turned and walked out without another word. The bell rang again, then silence. Malcolm didn't move. Ainsley waited a moment, then said, He's the one who wanted to sell. Malcolm nodded. And you didn't? I didn't want to admit I already had. They worked without music that afternoon. No radio, no clinking of glasses in rhythm, just the slow, methodical corking of bottles, the dull slap of labels being pressed onto glass by hand. Everything they did was deliberate, careful, as if each movement were being watched. But they weren't. It just felt that way. Malcolm didn't speak much, not out of anger, more the quiet that follows after someone scrapes through a layer of you you'd rather leave buried. Ainsley gave him space, but not distance. She sorted and boxed, checked batch numbers, tidied the palette. But every so often her glance would drift toward him, not worried, just waiting. Near the end of the run, as the last dozen bottles lined up under the copper lamps, she said without looking, You said he was the one who wanted to sell. He didn't answer immediately, just twisted the last cork home. I was tired, he said finally, but I didn't know it. Not properly. It was like keeping a boat moving after the tide's already turned. Ainsley nodded once. So you agreed? I signed, he said, but not because I believed in it. Because I didn't want to admit I didn't anymore. The quiet returned. This time less sharp, more settled. Ainsley took one of the bottles from the table, wiped a smudge off the glass. Nothing wrong with leaving something behind, she said. So long as you're moving towards something else. He looked over at her. I'm starting to think I am. She gave a small shrug. Good. And they kept working. Together. The pallet stood in the mouth of the barn, wrapped in clear plastic, the tape just slightly uneven across the top row of boxes. Hand-labeled bottles. 2 cases shy of the order, but promised for next week. Ainsley tightened the last strap and stepped back, brushing her hands on her jeans. Malcolm folded the packing slip and tucked it into the clipboard for the driver. They didn't say much as the white van backed up the lane, just listened to the grind of gravel and the hum of diesel. The driver hopped down, checked the paperwork, nodded, and together they loaded the pallet onto the lift. It rose with a shudder, then disappeared into the belly of the van. The door slammed shut. The driver offered a polite thumbs up and climbed in. And then, with little more than a sigh, the van rolled off down the track and toward the edge of the town. Malcolm stood there a moment, one hand in his pocket, the other still holding the clipboard. He didn't move, just watched it go. Ainsley nudged him lightly with her shoulder. Out in the world now. He exhaled a little slower than usual. Feels a bit like letting go of something I just learned to hold. She looked sideways at him. Don't worry, she said. They'll come back for more. He nodded but didn't answer, and together they watched the road go quiet again. It was late morning when Ernie McBride wandered up the lane, postbag slung over his shoulder and steam rising off his wool cap. Malcolm was outside checking the hinges on the barn's front doors. One had begun sticking in the wet. Morning, Ernie called. You're early, Malcolm replied. I'm bored, Ernie said, and someone left a package addressed only to Struan. Figured it belonged here. He passed over a small parcel. Bubble wrap showing through one corner, a faint whiskey stain on the tape. Malcolm turned it in his hand. Right. Not ominous at all. Ernie chuckled, then lingered. Had a couple tourists ask me about you the other day, he said. 2 lads from Stirling, I think. Big scarves, pointy shoes. You know the type. I don't, Malcolm said. Well, they'd heard about some Burnwater blend and came looking to try it. Thought I might know if there was a tasting room. I told them no. but they wandered off in the general direction of your barn anyway. Probably scared your sheep." Malcolm laughed. "I haven't got sheep." "Then someone else's," Ernie said. He tipped his cap. "Anyway, seems you've got fans. Thought you'd like to know." He trudged off down the lane, whistling something with too many flats. Malcolm turned the story over as he walked back into the barn. Ainsley was coiling hose by the still, her sleeves rolled to the elbow. "Do I look like someone with fans?" he asked. She didn't glance up. "No." "Couple of tourists showed up asking for a tasting." "Went to Ernie, poor man." She stopped, turned. "They came looking?" He nodded. "Apparently." She wiped her hands on a rag. "That matters." He gave her a look. "Not sure I want people poking their heads in here just yet." "That's not the question," she said. "The question is, what do you want them to see when they do?" The chalkboard leaned against the barn wall, left over from Ainsley's early cooperage tours, back when she used to host barrel classes for curious tourists and bored school kids. She picked it up, wiped off a faded equation about toast levels, and started drawing with a piece of pale blue chalk. Malcolm watched from the bench, arms folded. "Here," she said, circling a corner of the barn sketch. "South window, good light. Long table, rough pine if we can find it. No varnish, just oiled." He raised an eyebrow. "Why oiled?" "So it breathes," she said, like it should be obvious. She moved to another corner. "Shelf here. Nothing fancy. Bottles lined up, just the ones we've made so far. People taste, ask questions. You talk to them. Tell them why one's sharper, why one's rounder, why you're not ready to name this one yet. I'm not a salesman. You're not meant to be." She underlined the word talk. "You're a distiller. Tell the truth. That's all people want." Malcolm tilted his head. "And what do they pay for?" She looked up. "The chance to be in the room when the truth gets poured." He said nothing. She stepped back, studied the drawing. No signage, no gift shop, no fake peat-scented candles or branded water bottles. "Well, that ruins my whole business model," Malcolm muttered. She smiled faintly. "We build it simple. Honest. Let the place speak for itself." He watched her a moment longer, not doubting the idea, just feeling the weight of it. Because once you start building something that invites people in, it becomes real in a different way. Not just your work, your name. And maybe your heart, too. The south-facing corner had become a kind of quiet dumping ground. Spare bits of pipe, cracked crate lids, a pile of coarse rope that smelled faintly of brine and engine oil. Malcolm hadn't touched most of it since his first month in the barn. Back then, it had all felt like memory, or maybe inheritance. Now it just looked like things that needed to be moved. Ainsley pried open a storage crate with the back of a hammer and peered inside. "Copper offcuts," she said. "Good quality. Some of this could be sold." Malcolm nodded, kneeling to tug out an old coil of cable that had wrapped itself around a footstool. "I thought about fixing that stool once," he said. "Back when I thought everything broken could be saved." She didn't comment, just looked up at him from under her brow. They moved steadily, no rush. The sort of work that felt like planting. Not dramatic, not urgent, but forward. "Gregor used to sit here," Malcolm said quietly, gesturing toward the cleared corner. "Before I ever came back. I found his chair there, facing the window. Thought maybe he was watching the still." "Or just the sea," Ainsley said. "Could be." They stacked wood against the wall, pulled out nails, swept the floor. Malcolm paused halfway through tying off a bundle of ropes. "We could hang something there," he said, pointing to a long beam above the window. "Not a sign. Just something that says it's ours." Ainsley straightened, brush in hand. "We?" she asked. He looked over, didn't flinch. "We," he said, then turned back to the work. The knock was sharp, 2 raps and a pause. Malcolm was on the ladder sanding the beam above the south window when he heard it. Ainsley, wiping her hands, opened the door before he could climb down. Ruth stepped in like she'd been there 100 times. She held a green bottle of Jura by the neck, and 2 tumblers clinked in her coat pocket as she walked. "Well then," she said, glancing around. "So this is the tasting room." "It's a corner," Ainsley said. "All tasting rooms start that way." Malcolm came down the ladder slowly, brushing dust from his sleeves. "Didn't think we'd made the gossip circuit yet," he said. Ruth snorted. "Malcolm in Campbeltown. If a tourist knocks on Ernie McBride's door looking for whiskey and he sends them your way, everyone knows by supper." She set the bottle on the workbench and pulled out the glasses. "No fuss, just a dram, for blessing the space." They didn't protest. She poured, not too much, not too little, then raised her glass. "To stubbornness," she said, "and to opening doors when you could keep them shut." They clinked. The whiskey was bright and warm, peat light on the back. Ruth looked out the window, past the clearing mist and into the hills. "I like what you're doing here," she said finally. "It feels honest." She didn't elaborate, didn't need to. Ainsley poured her another small one for the road. Ruth declined, tucked the glass into her pocket again, and left with a nod. The door clicked shut behind her. Malcolm stood a long moment in the silence that followed, then said, "We've been blessed by the publican. No turning back now." The light outside had gone soft, not dark yet, but turning. That hour where everything looked briefly older and truer than it was. The corner was clear now, clean floor, empty wall. The beam above the window sanded and bare. Nothing in the space, but possibility. Malcolm disappeared into the house for a few minutes and came back carrying an old wooden chair, spindle-backed, pale ash, a little uneven in the legs. He set it down in the corner, gave it a small test wobble. "Not sure if it's comfortable," he said. Ainsley walked over, turned the chair to face the window, and sat. "It's not about comfort," she said. "It's about place." They stood there like that for a while. She seated, he leaning against the wall. Both of them looking out at the darkening sky, the quiet line of trees, and the faint curve of the road that wound back to town. No signs, no guests yet. No table or shelf or tasting menu. Just a chair in a clean corner. And 2 people who had finally made room for something new to begin. The road to Glasgow wound north along the loch, then east through soft hills that held on to the last of the season's gold. Rain came in faint bands, misting the windshield without ever fully settling in. Malcolm drove with both hands on the wheel, his jacket still damp from morning fog. Ainsley had brought a thermos of strong coffee, though neither had touched it in 10 miles. They weren't talking about the meeting, not really. "Did you know," she said, "that over-toasting a barrel by 30 seconds can shift the finish from almond to burnt raisin?" He raised an eyebrow. "No, but that sounds like something you'd know." She shrugged. "I've ruined better oak than most people ever touch." He smiled, kept his eyes on the road. They passed through Inverarray just before noon. The bridge stretched quiet over the water. "When was the last time you were in Glasgow?" she asked. He didn't answer straight away. "Maybe a year after I sold the company. Thought I'd go back and see if I missed it." "Did you?" "Only the bread," she laughed once. "God, the bread. Proper seeded loaf. Smells like it's been alive for a week." He nodded. "And the wee place on Bath Street that used to serve bacon rolls all night." "Still there," she said. "Changed owners, but still greasy as sin." He eased the car around a bend, the wipers squeaking lightly against the glass. "I once tried to wear a tie to a meeting on a boat," he said. "Got it caught in a cleat climbing down the dock ladder." She gave him a sideways look. "You didn't." "Near hung myself trying to impress a man from Denmark." Ainsley grinned. "Did it work?" "Lost the deal. But the man sent me a scarf the next winter. They drove the rest of the way in a companionable quiet, the kind that doesn't press. When the first rooftops of the city came into view, neither of them said a word. The keel sat on a narrow street in the merchant city, tucked between a florist's shop and a wine place that spelled shop with 2 P's and an E. It had no sign, just a brass anchor above the black-painted door and a long window dusted with condensation. Inside, the place was all warm brass, dark leather, and polished restraint. The shelves behind the bar looked more like a museum exhibit than a working inventory. Single malts arranged by region, year, and rarity, with soft lighting that made each bottle look twice as important. Malcolm hesitated in the doorway. Ainsley gave him a small nudge. "It's just a pub," she whispered. "A pub in heels." They stepped inside. Alec Carver emerged from behind the bar like someone trained in good entrances. Sleeves rolled, collar neat, hair swept back with casual precision. "Malcolm Struan," he said with a wide grin. "I'd been warned you were real, but this is quite something." They shook hands. Alec's grip was light but practiced. "And you must be Ainsley," he said, turning with the ease of someone who knew exactly when to pivot. "The barrels. The reputation. Pleased to meet you." She gave a cordial nod. "You've done your homework." "Occupational hazard," Alex said. "Let's get you settled." He led them to a table near the back. Dark wood, low light, no coasters. A polished bottle sat at the center. One of theirs, batch 3, label straight and proud. "I've had more than a few people ask about this," Alex said, pouring small measures into tulip glasses. "It's nostalgic, clean, complex. It feels like standing on wet stone." Malcolm blinked. "That's a hell of a metaphor." "Compliment," Alex said, raising his glass. "We're interested." "Seriously. But I want to talk exclusivity, representation, possibly a feature on the seasonal list." Ainsley took a sip, but didn't comment. Malcolm kept his hands on the table. He wasn't sure what bothered him more, the smoothness of the pitch, or how easily Alec had memorized what they were before they'd said a word. Alec leaned forward, fingers tented under his chin, elbows just close enough to the glass to suggest a casual urgency. "I've been thinking about rollout," he said. "There's a seasonal promotion we run. 1 dram per region, limited time, curated tasting flight. If we lead with yours in Campbeltown's slot, it anchors the whole thing." Malcolm said nothing. Alec went on. "But we'd need exclusivity. Just for the quarter. The keel becomes the only Glasgow bar pouring Struan." He glanced at Ainsley. "We can handle promotion, write-ups, a little press buzz, burn water revival, maybe. Romanticize the process without dumbing it down. That's what sells." Malcolm set his glass down. "We're not selling romance." Alec smiled. I know. But story sells, and you've got a hell of one. This place, the comeback, the ghost of Campbeltown whiskey rising from the floorboards." "We're not selling that either," Malcolm said, sharper now. "There's no ghost." Ainsley watched him, silent. Her eyes stayed steady. Alec, still smiling, tried to soften his pitch. "Right. Of course. But people connect to stories. They want to feel like they're part of something. Something with soul." Malcolm looked at him plainly. "I'm not selling a story," he said. "I'm selling something honest in a glass. That's all." The words settled like a dropped stone. Alec leaned back slightly, hands opening in mock surrender. "Fair enough," he said, voice gentler. "It's your whiskey." Ainsley didn't speak. She just reached for her glass and took another sip. Malcolm didn't look at her, but he could feel it, her letting him speak for it. Letting it be his, and that more than anything else, steadied the room. For a moment after Malcolm spoke, no one said anything. Alec glanced down at his glass, then reached behind the table and pulled out a second bottle. Their latest. The cask blend. No label yet, just a strip of tape across the shoulder, and a neat handwritten date. "Can I?" he asked. Malcolm gave a short nod. Alec poured carefully, then offered the bottle toward Ainsley. She took it and poured for Malcolm. No swirl, no nosing routine, no clever tasting notes, so they just drank. The whiskey was young but not raw. There was weight in the middle, peat on the back, and a warm finish that tasted faintly of honeycomb and wet stone. Alec didn't speak right away. He sipped once more, slower. Set the glass down. Then he gave a quiet laugh through his nose. "Right," he said. "Okay." He looked at Malcolm. "Maybe this doesn't need dressing up." Malcolm didn't smile, but something in his shoulders let go. Ainsley leaned forward. "So, the offer." Alec raised his hands. "Still stands. You don't have to say yes, but it's on the table, as is a spot in the lineup. On your terms." Malcolm glanced at her just briefly, then nodded. "We'll think on it." "Of course," Alec said. "And if you ever want to do a proper launch, tasting event, press, all that, I'll write you a poem," Malcolm said. Alec grinned. "Long as you read it with a dram in your hand." The city fell behind them mile by mile. Streetlights gave way to hedgerows. Neon gave way to stone fences and fields just beginning to go bare. The car was quiet. Ainsley drove this time. Malcolm hadn't said why, just passed her the keys with a small shrug. He looked out the window most of the way, his elbow resting near the glass, fingers curled like he might drum them, but didn't. Somewhere near Loch Fyne, he finally spoke. "I don't think I hate the city," he said. Ainsley glanced sideways. "No? I think I just didn't know how to be in it." She waited a moment, then said, "You weren't done becoming." He turned his head slightly. "That's a loaded phrase." She smiled. "I know. But it fits." They passed a row of cottages with blue smoke rising from the chimneys. 2 kids kicked a football in a muddy front garden. Malcolm shifted in his seat. "It's strange," he said. "Used to think the thing that would matter most was how far I could go. Now it feels like it's how deep I can stay." Ainsley didn't respond right away. Then, "That's a better line than anything Alec tried to put in your mouth." He gave a quiet laugh. They didn't speak after that. The road bent westward. The air grew saltier. And then the sea came into view, laid out flat and silver beneath the low sun. The barn was warm with late afternoon sun, spilling through the south window in a long pane of gold. The table was in place, simple, unvarnished pine, its knots and imperfections left bare. 3 shelves held a neat line of bottles. The labels were still a bit crooked, but Ainsley said that made them more honest. Malcolm stood on a short stool, tapping an old iron nail into the beam above the window. The wood groaned a little. Ainsley leaned against the tasting table with her arms crossed, watching him. "You're sure that's where it goes?" "I'm not sure about anything," Malcolm said, "but I'm doing it anyway." He hung the rope, thick, weathered, frayed at one end. It had once moored his grandfather's boat to the pier behind the house. The salt had eaten away at it, but the knots were still firm. It hung there like punctuation, not a decoration exactly, more like a mark left on the sentence they were still writing. Ainsley stepped forward, tilted her head, and studied it. "They're going to ask what it means." "I know. What will you tell them?" He looked at the rope for a long moment. "Only if they ask twice." She smiled, faint and warm. Outside, they heard the crunch of tires on gravel. Ainsley glanced toward the door. "Right," she said. "Time to pour something." Malcolm stepped down from the stool. He didn't say anything, just picked up a bottle and pulled the cork like it was the most natural thing in the world. The first knock came soft, more polite than expectant. Ainsley opened the door to find Isla standing just outside, her brown hair pulled back in a low knot, scarf tucked neat at the neck. She held a small tin of shortbread, like something brought for a visit rather than an event. Her partner stood beside her, tall, well-kept beard, hands buried in his coat pockets. He gave a nod, not too familiar. "Thought we'd see what all the quiet noise was about," Isla said. Malcolm stepped forward. "You're early." "We thought that might be safer," she said with a glance around the quiet barn. "I don't like talking over people." He smiled. "Neither do I." Ainsley took the tin with a warm thanks, placed it on the table near the glasses. She poured 2 small drams of the latest cask blend, measured but generous. Isla cradled the glass in both hands before sipping. She didn't say anything at first. Just breathed it in, then took a small taste, eyes narrowing slightly. "Salt on the front," she said. "Not sharp, like it knows it belongs there." Her partner nodded, took another sip. Malcolm leaned back against the bench. "Your uncle used to drink by nose more than mouth," he said. "He swore you could tell everything worth knowing from the first breath." "I remember," she said. "He'd come home with his coat smelling of stills and cold wind. My mum hated it. Said he always smelled like a fire that never went out." Malcolm didn't reply, but his jaw moved slightly. Something held or remembered. Isla finished her glass. She glanced around the barn, at the rope above the window, the shelves, the light. "Can I bring my father sometime?" she asked. Malcolm nodded once. "Aye, any time." She gave him a small smile, not warm exactly, just real, then placed the empty glass gently on the table. They came in together, just after 4, smelling faintly of tobacco and the fried onions from Ruth's back kitchen. "Ruth said you were pouring," said the first, a broad man in a waxed jacket with a voice like low tide. "Didn't say we had to dress for it." Malcolm gave them a nod and waved toward the table. "Only rules, no perfume. Everything else is negotiable." The second man was shorter, in a charcoal jumper with patched elbows. He scanned the barn like he was checking for rivets. The third didn't say much, just tipped his head toward Ainsley and removed his flat cap, holding it in both hands like he'd wandered into church by accident. Ainsley poured 3 careful drams, handed them off in silence. The man with the patched jumper swirled his glass with the absent precision of habit, then sniffed. "Ex-bourbon barrel?" "Mostly," Malcolm said. "Some refill sherry. Light char." The man nodded, then held his glass up to the light. "Good legs." "Rory used to teach geography," said the wax jacket man. Then he started mapping places that didn't exist. "I did not," Rory said flatly. "I mapped disputed borders." "There's a difference." He took a slow sip, his brow lifted slightly. "Have you considered export?" he asked. "Japan loves small-batch scotch with an origin story." Malcolm shrugged. "We're still figuring out who we are before we sell the myth." Rory nodded, like that was a reasonable answer. The quiet one finished his glass first. He licked his bottom lip thoughtfully, then looked Malcolm in the eye. "This is better than the stuff with the gold horse on the label," he said. Ainsley tried not to laugh. Malcolm gave a small bow. "I'll take that." The 3 of them stayed maybe 20 minutes. They didn't ask for more, didn't say much on their way out. But as they left, the man in the wax jacket paused at the door. "You'll need more chairs," he said. Then they were gone. The young man came in near the tail end of the evening footfall, just as the light outside went gray and slanted. He wasn't from town, not entirely anyway. Something about his boots said city, and his jacket still held the folded creases from being packed. But he nodded to Malcolm with the kind of politeness that came from respect, not nervousness. "Evening," he said. "Is it all right if I ask a few questions?" "You're holding the glass already," Malcolm replied. The young man grinned and looked to Ainsley, who poured him a dram, small, clean. "Batch 3. He took a careful sip, didn't rush it, didn't make a face. Then he said, "What size cask was this aged in?" Ainsley straightened just slightly. "First fill ex-bourbon, American white oak, 200 liters. Char. Level 2, medium toast. It came from Kelvin Cooperage. I scraped it myself." Malcolm leaned on the bench, arms crossed. He didn't interrupt. The young man nodded. And the cut point? Ainsley didn't blink. First cut started just after 72% ABV. We let it run warm and slow. Ended the hearts just before 64.5. Anything below that went to the faints tank. The man looked surprised. That's precise. She shrugged. It matters. He sipped again. You don't dilute much. Only what's needed to keep it civil, she said. Otherwise it loses its shape. Malcolm watched the exchange without stepping in. He could have said those things, but he didn't need to. The young man asked a few more. Mash bill, fermentation time, fill strength. Ainsley answered them all plainly. No hesitation, no oversell. At the end, he set the glass down gently. Thanks, he said, for not treating me like a customer. Ainsley gave a quiet smile. We don't pour for customers. We pour for people. He nodded once, then turned and walked out into the dusk. Malcolm looked over at her. You enjoyed that, he said. Ainsley raised an eyebrow. So did you. By 6:30, the barn had gone quiet again, the way it always did after something true had been said. The glasses were stacked neatly. The bottles were only a little lighter. Outside, the last of the sky was turning indigo over the hills, and the lane below had settled into stillness. Malcolm moved slowly through the space, checking things that didn't need checking, straightening the rope, adjusting a bottle, brushing nothing off the table. Ainsley leaned against the far beam, arms crossed, her hair lit gold in the last light from the window. Neither of them spoke, not yet. Then the barn door swung open with the familiar squeal of unoiled hinges. Ruth stood in the doorway, coat undone, hands in her pockets. She didn't step inside. She looked around, the table, the shelves, the clean wood floor, the chair in the corner. No one poured her a dram. No one needed to. She took it in with the sort of look a farmer gives a fence post that's finally holding steady. Well, she said after a moment, you've made a room worth sitting in. Malcolm opened his mouth to reply, but she was already turning. The door clicked softly shut behind her, and for a long moment neither of them moved. Then Ainsley walked over to the table, picked up one of the glasses, and held it out. To quiet praise, she said. Malcolm clinked his glass to hers, and they drank in silence. It started with the wind. Not a breeze, not a stiff breath, but a full-bellied roar off the water that bent the old hawthorn trees sideways and sent gulls reeling inland like they'd changed their minds. Malcolm heard it in the early dark, before dawn had properly committed. It came through the chimney like a warning. By the time he pulled his boots on, the gutters were overflowing. Ainsley was already at the barn when he arrived, her coat soaked through the shoulders, her hair pinned back in a rushed twist. "Leaking," she called before he could ask. "By the south window." They stepped in together. The place was loud with the sound of water, not pouring, but pattering, steady, like fingers drumming the floorboards. A thin line of rain had found its way through the seal above the window, trickling in and puddling beneath one of the low cask racks. "Shite," Malcolm muttered. "It's not deep yet," Ainsley said, "but we'll need to shift these." They worked fast, pulled the casks away from the wall, set buckets beneath the leak, draped tarpaulin over the tasting table. The barn was colder than usual. Not from the temperature, from the way the weather got inside you, found your wrists, your knees, your neck. Malcolm slipped once, caught himself on a beam. Damned building's trying to drown itself. "Just a little weather," Ainsley said, grinning as she shoved another crate under the drip. "Could be worse." "How?" "Could be snow," she said. "Could have blown the roof clean off." Comforting. She flashed him a look, that half smile that wasn't quite smug, just more sure of the moment than he was. A cask thudded as they lowered it together, carefully, onto higher bricks. Outside, the wind yanked at the eaves like it meant to take them with it. Inside, their breath rose in white clouds, but the work went on, and neither of them stopped moving. The rain found the small things first, the weak spots. It crept down the walls, followed the lines where wood met stone, and gathered quiet in the joints of the racks. Malcolm knelt near the second row of barrels, hand flat against one of the casks, fingers coming away damp. Not from the rain, from the seam. "Shit," he said, not loud. Ainsley turned. "What?" He pointed to the stain creeping slowly down the wood. A thin sheen, almost nothing, but unmistakably whiskey. She came close, crouched beside him, ran a thumb along the base, then checked the cask behind it. That one too, just a faint weep along the belly. "How bad?" he asked. "Not bad," she said. "Maybe a few ounces each. Just the wood shifting. Temperature hit it too fast." He didn't answer, just stared at the slick spot like it had betrayed him. "You'd rather they didn't weep," she added. "I'd rather they held." Ainsley sat back on her heels, brushing wet curls from her face. "Malcolm," she said gently, "if it's never at risk, it's never alive." He looked at her, eyes narrowing a little. Not angry, just searching. "I know that's true," he said. "I just hate that it's true today." She didn't reply, just stood, wiped her palms on her jeans and offered him a hand. He took it, let her pull him up. The barn still smelled of damp wood and spirit, not lost, not ruined, just living. The wind caught them sideways on the walk back to the house, stealing the breath from their throats and slapping rain against their cheeks in quick, cold bursts. Malcolm didn't speak, neither did Ainsley. There wasn't much to say that hadn't already been said in the barn, in the work, the worry, the weight of things done carefully. Inside the house, the walls held the damp close to the floor, and the windows fogged from the sudden heat of them. Malcolm shed his coat with both hands, fingers stiff and red at the knuckles. Ainsley hung hers over the back of a chair and moved into the kitchen. The kettle clicked on. The stove groaned once as he lit it. Old cast iron, slow to start. He sat on the bench by the hearth, boots still on, socks beginning to feel like sponges. Ainsley moved through the space like she'd always known it. Not with possession, but with understanding. She didn't ask where things were. She didn't need to. The tea came without sugar. She knew he wouldn't want any. She handed him the mug, her fingers brushing his, then rested her hand on his shoulder. Not long, not heavy. He didn't move. The rain ticked against the windows like a held breath. The stove popped as the flame caught. They stayed that way, not speaking, not rushing toward anything, just warming back into themselves. When she finally pulled her hand away, it wasn't because the moment was over. It was because it had settled. The stove had warmed the room in slow circles. Steam curled from their mugs. The windows were all but fogged over now, the storm beyond softened to a dull roar. Malcolm leaned forward, elbows on his knees, cradling the heat of the cup. Ainsley sat on the floor near the hearth, legs crossed, hands tucked in the sleeves of an old jumper she must have pulled from the back of the coat rack. She looked younger like that, not small, but stripped down to something spare. "He had the steadiest hands," she said, not looking at him. "My father." Malcolm turned slightly. "He built fences," she went on, "not because he liked the work, he didn't, but because he hated watching things fall down." Malcolm smiled faintly at that. "He taught me how to mend rails, how to tell when the rot was surface and when it ran deep. Said if you could fix the thing and make it last through winter, it was worth your time." She turned her mug in her hands, watching the swirl of the tea. "I asked him once why he kept doing it year after year. He said, because it's mine to keep upright." Her voice wasn't wistful, just honest. Malcolm set his mug down. He didn't say anything, just sat back, watching her. When she finally looked up, it wasn't abrupt. Her eyes met his with a quiet steadiness, something lived in, not searching. And he didn't look away. The moment held, not fragile, not bold. Just there, like a door neither of them had needed to knock on. She didn't say anything, just leaned forward slightly, reached up and rested her head against his shoulder. Malcolm didn't move, didn't stiffen, didn't exhale. He simply let her be there, as though she always had been. The fire gave a soft snap. The stove hissed faintly with the damp still drying from their clothes. Her hand rested on the bench beside him, palm down, relaxed. After a moment, one long enough that neither of them could claim impulse, he laid his hand over hers. No pressure, no tightening of fingers, just warmth. The window rattled once in the gust outside, but neither of them looked up. There was no surprise in it. Whatever was beginning, or admitting itself, had been there a while. They didn't name it, didn't need to. The world had rinsed itself clean overnight. The wind was gone, tucked back out to sea, and the rain had wrung the hills of every last drop. Now the light came crisp and angular, sliding over stones and puddles like a thin sheet of glass. Malcolm stepped out first, still shrugging into his jacket. Ainsley followed with a thermos in one hand and a folded blanket in the other, the kind of morning habit that happens before it becomes one. They didn't speak on the walk. The barn stood in silhouette ahead of them, darker than the trees, the roofline just slightly skewed now if you knew how it used to sit. Malcolm slowed as they neared it. The gravel underfoot had softened to thick, wet soil. The barn door was still closed, still latched. He unhooked the bolt and pushed it open. The inside smelled faintly of damp straw and spirit. A few stray leaves scattered across the floor. A thin sheet of condensation clung to the south window, but the barrels were dry. The buckets had held. The rope above the window hadn't fallen. It stood, Ainsley said behind him. Malcolm exhaled. Barely. Still, she added, walking past him and setting the thermos on the table. It won't again without help. He looked around the space, noting the bowed beam near the back, the sag where the eave had caught too much wind. I'll get up there this afternoon, he said. We'll get up there, she corrected. He turned to her, but she was already unscrewing the cap from the thermos, pouring hot tea into 2 tin mugs like she'd always meant to. She handed him one. He took it without speaking. Outside the light kept rising, and the barn, tired, rattled, damp at the edges, stayed upright. The roof gave underfoot, just enough to keep them careful. The slates were slick and cold in the morning air, the nails in Malcolm's mouth biting back with every breath. He crouched low, pressing the heel of his hand to a rotted board just above the window frame. Start here, he muttered, setting his hammer down. Ainsley climbed up beside him with the timber slats tucked under one arm. She looked past him, toward the eastern side where the eave had torn back slightly. That one's worse, she said. I know, he said, tapping the board. But if we don't seal this first, we'll be back here tomorrow with a mop. It'll hold another day. And if it doesn't, Ainsley exhaled through her nose. Fine, you're the one with the hammer. He glanced sideways. Don't make me regret it. She passed him a slat. Already regretting not making you climb the ladder second. They worked in silence for a while, the only sounds the knock of the hammer and the soft shift of slate under their knees. After a time, she passed him nails without needing to be asked. When he reached for the chisel, she was already holding it out. The sun rose behind them, dry and cold. A gull passed overhead. Malcolm sat back on his heels, wiped the sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. You were right about the other Eve, he said, nodding toward the far corner. I usually am, she replied, deadpan. Then she passed him the next board. They kept working, the cold in their hands forgotten, the ache in their legs ignored. Somewhere between the last nail and the first break in the cloud cover, they stopped feeling like 2 people fixing a roof, and started feeling like one thing, keeping something standing. They ate at the tasting table with the barn doors propped open, letting the last of the storm's scent drift out into the grass. The air still held a bite, but the sun had shown up late and low, offering just enough warmth to sit still. A tin of sandwiches sat between them. Thick slices of bread, buttered heavily, ham from the butcher's. Neither had remembered to pack salt. Neither seemed to mind. Malcolm chewed quietly for a while, then nodded toward the back wall. "We'll need more insulation before December." Ainsley swallowed, set her cup down. "A second layer under the west cladding. That wall loses heat too fast." He nodded. "And the floor." She raised an eyebrow. "You want to dig out the whole floor?" "Just enough to lay proper drainage. That patch behind the second rack turns into a puddle with any real rain." She took another bite. "We should look at a rick house, something just for aging. This place is too warm in summer. If we keep expanding—" "If," Malcolm said. Ainsley glanced at him, smiled a little. "When?" He leaned back slightly, cup in hand. When?" A gust of sea air rolled in through the open door, lifting the edge of the tarp they'd forgotten to fold. Neither of them moved to fix it. Instead, Malcolm said, "We'll need better shelving. And more glass. And labels," Ainsley added. "Printed ones. Straight, maybe." They both smiled, and without meaning to, without planning it, they'd started saying we. No hesitation, no pause. She looked at him, brushing a crumb from her lip. "If we're going to grow," she said softly, "we'll have to grow well." He didn't answer. He just nodded, because they were no longer guessing at it. They were making something. Together. Later that afternoon, after the tools had been stowed and the last of the tarps folded, Malcolm disappeared into the house. Ainsley stayed in the barn, wiping down the tasting table, realigning the bottles on the back shelf, brushing the grit from the doorway with the flat of her boot. The light had started its descent, slow and gold through the window panes, when she heard the creak of the front door again. Malcolm returned with a chair under one arm. It was older than the one already at the tasting table, not quite as smooth, its backrest carved with a faded thistle design. One leg had a split near the base, mended with a brass pin. He carried it like it weighed nothing, but he handled it with care. She said nothing. Just watched. He set it down beside the first chair, not across from it. Not at the end of the table, just next to it, close enough to be beside, not apart. Then he straightened, adjusted the leg so it didn't wobble, and stepped back. Ainsley raised an eyebrow, barely. He didn't explain. She didn't ask. Instead, she walked over, set down the cloth she'd been using, and sat. Not with ceremony, not with drama. Just ease. She leaned back slightly, hands in her lap, legs crossed at the ankle. He remained standing a moment longer, then sat down too. The two chairs didn't match, but they belonged in the same room. Evening dropped down slowly, its weight gathering in the hollows of the fields and hedgerows. The air had that sharp iron smell that came after a storm, like everything was breathing out at once. They walked the back fence together. It wasn't part of the day's plan, just something that pulled them toward it. The wind had passed through the valley hard, and the old fence ran long and crooked up the rise, a mix of stone, wire, and weather-beaten posts older than Malcolm could remember. They didn't speak as they walked. Just stepped through the grass, boots damp to the ankle. At the far end of the field, two of the posts leaned westward, where the gusts had hit hardest. The wire still held, but the tilt was obvious. Malcolm crouched beside the first one, pressing his hand against it. The earth gave slightly beneath his weight. "Loose," he said. Ainsley stood just behind him, arms crossed against the cold. "We'll brace them this time," Malcolm added, "not just dig them deeper." She looked out toward the hills, then back down at the post. "We'll keep them upright," she said. He nodded, and that was all. No big words, no plans drawn up, just the quiet knowing of what would be done, by whom and how, and together. The barn was quiet again. Not storm quiet, but settled. The kind of hush that comes after long labor has eased, and the only sound left is breath and wood. The cask sat alone on the low rack near the north wall. untouched for months. Not because they'd forgotten it, but because they'd been watching it. Waiting. Ainsley rolled back the bung gently, without talking, then reached for the Valinch, the long copper thief, polished to a dull glow from years of use. Malcolm stood with his hands in his pockets, eyes fixed on the floor. She drew the whiskey in one slow pull, lifting the Valinch with practiced care, the spirit rising up like sunlight caught in glass. The color was pale gold, not thin, just young. It clung to the copper as she moved, trembling slightly in the cool air. She filled 2 tasting glasses and set the Valinch aside. Neither of them reached for the drink yet. Malcolm stepped closer, took in the scent. Salt, light smoke, something citrusy beneath. "You remember the first time?" he asked. She nodded. "I thought it was too clean." "You said it was missing anger." He smiled faintly. "It's calmed down since then." They lifted their glasses, swirled, nosed, then tasted. Ainsley didn't speak, not right away. Just let the whiskey settle on her tongue. Malcolm swallowed, exhaled. "Still ours," he said. She nodded. "Still Struan." It wasn't a celebration, it was something quieter, deeper, like a name being said for the first time and meaning it. The hydrometer floated in the tall glass cylinder, its little paper scale wobbling until it found stillness. Ainsley bent low and squinted. 61.3. Malcolm scribbled the figure into the small ledger on the table, its pages stained with water rings, pencil smudges, and ink from other afternoons. "High," he said. She nodded. "Good high." He looked at the number again, then back at the glass. "It's strong." "It's honest." "But is it ready?" Ainsley didn't answer at once. She lifted the glass, swirled what remained from her tasting pour, and took another small sip. Then she set it down and met his eyes. "It's ready. We'd know if it wasn't." Malcolm's brow creased. "We could wait another year. Let it mellow. Try a few more finishes." "We could." "But," Ainsley closed the ledger, "but that wouldn't be this whiskey." He looked down at his hands, at the calluses that hadn't softened despite the months, at the pen resting in the crook of his fingers. The hesitation wasn't doubt. It was weight, the weight of knowing that once they proofed it down, once it was bottled, there was no turning back. He let out a breath. "All right," he said. "We go to cut." She was already reaching for the dropper in the water, not fast, not urgent, just ready. The first drop hit the whiskey like a stone into a still pond. A thin bloom of haze spread out in the glass, that cloudy shimmer that always came when spirit met water too fast. Malcolm watched it settle. "Every time," he said softly. Ainsley said nothing, just lifted the dropper again and added another measure, this time slower. The haze pulled back, cleared. She swirled the glass, waited. Malcolm took a sip, eyes narrowing. "Still sharp at the edge?" She nodded, reached again, added 2 more drops. The whiskey shifted again, then stilled. 49.3, she said, checking the hydrometer. They tasted again, together, quietly, deliberately. Malcolm set his glass down, stared at it. "It's softer. It's clearer," she said. "The pepper's off the nose now." Another drop. Then another. They didn't talk. They listened, not to each other, but to the glass, to the whiskey, to what it gave and what it held back. Finally, she measured it again. 48.6. He took a long, slow sip, held it, let it stretch out across the tongue, then swallowed and nodded. "That's what it wants to be." Ainsley smiled but didn't say "I told you so." She didn't have to. They bottled the first one just after dusk. No fanfare, no music or toast. Just quiet hands working in rhythm. The funnel, the cork, the cloth to wipe the lip clean. Malcolm held the bottle upright, still warm from being filled. The liquid inside caught the barn's single hanging bulb and turned it amber, soft and slow. He stared at the label. Blank white stock, slightly textured. No print yet. I don't want a crest, he said. Good, Ainsley replied. We haven't earned one. He looked over at her, half smiling. Struan #1? She nodded. Simple and honest. He passed her the pencil. She didn't hesitate. In clear, steady print, she wrote, Struan #1, 48.6% ABV. 2025. Then, without asking, she handed it back. Malcolm held the bottle in both hands, not tightly, just aware of its weight. It wasn't the best whiskey ever made, but it was theirs. The pub was warm with bodies and low voices. The windows had fogged from the inside, and Ruth's brass till clicked open and shut like a metronome. Malcolm and Ainsley took their usual spot, near the corner by the fire, 2 pints between them, neither fresh. He hadn't said much since they corked the bottle, but it hung between them. The weight of what had been done, not loud, not boastful, just present. Across the room, someone leaned in close to Gregor and whispered something. Gregor nodded, then looked their way. Not a big look, just a quiet acknowledgement. A murmur moved through a few other tables. Heads turned subtly. And then Isla stood, pint in hand, her coat still draped over the stool behind her. She didn't raise her voice, didn't call for silence. She just lifted her glass and said, It's about time, that was all. No clapping, no fuss. Just a few others lifting glasses in kind, and then the room eased back into its rhythm. Malcolm said nothing. He didn't look at Ainsley, but he raised his pint and drank. The ledger lay open on the table, a pencil resting in its spine. The handwriting was neat, careful, all in Ainsley's hand. 5 orders. 3 for Edinburgh. 1 shop. 2 private collectors. 1 for a friend of Rory's from the coast who wanted whatever you're most proud of. And 1 envelope, handwritten from Glasgow. Alec Morrison, West End. Just a name, no note. The way old friends ask for things. Plainly. Malcolm stood over the shipping bench, measuring tape draped around his neck like it had grown there. He folded the flaps of the box, pressed the tape down tight, and took longer than he needed to smoothing the label. Ainsley leaned in the doorway, arms crossed, mug in hand. She didn't say anything, just watched him wrap the bottle in brown paper and tie it off with twine. "You'll write him back?" she asked. He nodded. "Aye, once it lands." She took a sip of her tea, smiled slightly. "You always were good with long silences." He looked up at her then, held her gaze for a moment longer than usual. "Not with all of them," he said. She didn't smile again, but something softened in her face. He turned back to the box, wrote the address in clean block letters, then set it aside with the others. 5 bottles, 1 name that still mattered. The pub was half empty when they brought the bottles in. Late afternoon, the sky outside the windows pale with approaching dusk. Ruth stood behind the bar in her usual posture, elbows on the wood, tea beside the till, book face down like she'd been halfway through a thought and lost interest. She didn't say anything when she saw them, just raised one eyebrow and tilted her chin toward the back shelf. Malcolm set the wrapped bottles on the counter. Ainsley placed the invoice beside them. No price listed, just trade. Ruth pulled one from the paper and turned it in her hand. "First one's for pouring," she said. "Only if they're the right sort." She picked up the second. "This one's not for drinking." Malcolm frowned. "What then?" She slid it beneath the bar. "Proof, if anyone doubts you did it." He let out half a laugh. "You planning to hold a court case?" "If I must," she said. "Town has a short memory sometimes. Good whiskey helps." Ruth placed the bottle on the back shelf. No fuss, no announcement. Just set it there next to a 30-year-old Glen Scotia and a dusty green spot with the label half torn. Then she turned, took a sip of her tea, and walked toward the kitchen. "Thank you," Malcolm called after her. She didn't turn, just waved one hand in the air as she disappeared behind the door. They waited for the sun to dry the grass before walking out. The earth was firmer now, dry enough to hold weight. The last leaning post stood near the far end of the rise, where the wind always hit hardest. It hadn't fallen, but it had bowed, the kind of quiet failure that only gets worse with time. Malcolm carried the sledge and brace boards. Ainsley brought the nails. Neither said much. He held the board while she drove the first spike. 2 clean strikes, then another. She handed the hammer back. He adjusted the angle slightly, then nailed the second board flush to the post. The sound echoed out across the field. When they finished, Malcolm pressed his palm flat against the top of the post. It held without shifting. Ainsley gave a single nod, not proud, just satisfied. They moved to the next and the next, 4 posts in all, each one straightened, braced, set to hold. When they reached the gate, Malcolm looked back down the fence line. "Looks better now," he said. "It was never about looks," she replied. He smiled. No, it wasn't. The wind picked up slightly, but only enough to rustle the gorse. The line held. It was nearly dark when they sat at the table again, a small stack of fresh labels between them, the glue pot still warm, a single bottle uncorked nearby. Ainsley set her pen down after affixing the last label and looked at it, not admiring, not critiquing, just looking. Then she said, "We should sign them." Malcolm looked up. "Not for vanity," she added quickly. "Just to market, so someone knows a hand was on it." He didn't answer right away. She reached for one of the finished bottles, turned it slightly in her hand, then, with quiet certainty, signed her name in the lower corner of the label. Ainsley Macrae. No flourish, no hesitation. She passed the pen to him. He held it for a long moment, then picked up another label and looked down at the space where hers had gone. Instead of writing beside it, he moved slightly lower, near the bottom edge. M, a single initial, nothing more. When he put the pen down, he said, "That's enough." She nodded. "It is, and it was." The stove crackled softly, throwing shadows that moved slowly across the floorboards. Malcolm sat in the old chair, socks warmed through. Back eased into the cushion like he meant to stay there a while. Ainsley sat beside him, her legs tucked up, one hand around a glass, the other resting palm down on the armrest between them. The bottle sat open on the table. Struan number 1. Neither of them had spoken in a while. Not because there was nothing to say, just nothing that needed saying. Outside, the sea wind murmured along the walls, but the windows didn't rattle. Not tonight. Malcolm reached for his glass. Ainsley lifted hers at the same time. They clinked them together, not a toast, not a cheer. Just a sound. Just to hear it. The fire popped once and the heat held steady. He took a sip. So did she. And then they sat, in the quiet, with the whiskey and the warmth and the work behind them, and the shape of things to come all around, still unwritten, but already underway.